Hi guys. Tonight we slip quietly into the dim corridors of a medieval castle, that strange mixture of grandeur and discomfort, where cold seeps into your bones long before the story even begins. You can almost hear your own footsteps tapping against stone that never seems to warm, not even in summer, and the air feels cool on your cheeks as though someone left all the windows open, even though half of them are barely more than arrow slits. You stand there wrapped in a cloak that feels far too thin for what you are about to face, and there is a tiny voice in your mind whispering that if you were actually dropped into this place with nothing but your modern hoodie, you probably would not survive this. The walls have seen centuries of frost and winter storms, and every inch around you gives off the same slow, patient chill. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you want to let me know where you are listening from and what time it is where you are, I always love seeing those little snapshots of the world. Now, dim the lights, and you step forward into the castle's silence, feeling how the cold wraps around you like a cloak of its own. You walk deeper into this frozen space, noticing how the torches flicker in narrow sconces along the wall, giving off more light than heat. A torch flame might look heroic in movies, but in reality, it barely changes the temperature around you. Your breath forms a faint cloud in the air, and you understand instantly why medieval people considered winter not just a season but almost an adversary. Still, as you move through the halls, you start to realize that knights and residents had countless ways to hold the cold at bay, some practical, some a bit odd, and some still debated by scholars today. The castle stones around you feel ancient. You reach out with your fingertips and touch one block, noticing how it seems to drink the warmth from your skin. Stone is unyielding and impressive, but it is also a terrible insulator. That is your first major historical fact tonight. Medieval castles were engineering marvels when it came to defense, but they were not designed with comfort in mind. A castle could shrug off arrows and battering rams with ease, but it could not shrug off a cold front, which explains why staying warm was practically a daily mission for every resident. As you continue walking, you pass an alcove, where someone long ago carved a little shelf into the wall. You imagine it once held a candle. You imagine the tiny light trying to chase away the dark. You imagine a knight stopping here to warm his hands even though the candle could not do much for him. You can almost hear him muttering to himself about how the draft always finds that exact spot. And then you catch yourself thinking that even now, 8 centuries later, the draft still does. A quirky little historical tidbit floats through your mind as you turn a corner. Some accounts suggest that people in particularly cold halls would spread warm ashes or embers inside pottery bowls and set them near their feet. Not quite a heater, not quite a fire, just a small, glowing comfort. It sounds charming until you realize that a single accidental nudge could scatter hot ash across the rushes on the floor. Fire safety was more of a vibe than a system back then. The corridor narrows. You can feel its funnel-like design guiding air from one end to the other. Was that intentional? Historians still argue whether certain chilly gusts inside castles were simply bad luck in architecture, or whether some drafts were, in fact, side effects of deliberate airflow choices to control smoke. You pull your cloak tighter, not knowing whether to blame poor planning or clever engineering. As you step into a slightly wider space, the sound changes. Your boots scuff against stone that feels smoother under your soles. The air is still cold, but there is a subtle heaviness to it now, almost as if someone once stored warmth here, and a compressed memory of it remains. You pause and imagine a knight returning from patrol, stamping snow off his greaves, shaking out his gambeson, and looking for even the faintest hint of warmth. He would have known every warm corner better than he knew the castle's defences. Comfort, after all, was its own kind of survival. You drift into a chamber where the ceiling lifts higher. A tapestry hangs on one wall, faded and soft. Your eyes travel across its surface, noticing the worn cloth, the threads that once glowed with deep crimson and green. It might not look impressive now, but you know its presence mattered. Even a single tapestry changed the way a room felt. It trapped heat. It reduced the echo. It softened the glare of stone. It made existence inside these cold walls a little more bearable. That is the thing about medieval castles. Every object was multifunctional. Beauty and practicality were often the same thing. You can almost smell the faint scent of old wool and smoke, like the lingering presence of dozens of fires that once burned in this chamber. You picture the people who slept here during winter nights, huddled together, breathing slow clouds into the darkness. You imagine how quiet it must have been. aside from the occasional crackle of a dying ember or the distant hoot of an owl outside. Maybe someone whispered a prayer for warmth. Maybe someone else complained about icy feet. Maybe a knight tried to tell a brave story, only to have someone ask if he could please tell it later because they were all trying to sleep. A cool breeze brushes your cheek from an unseen gap. It reminds you that these castles were not built with modern precision. One crack, one misaligned stone, one ill-fitting shutter, and winter found its way in. You take a slow breath and notice how the air feels slightly different now, carrying the faintest scent of pine. Somewhere outside the walls, a forest waits, cloaked in frost. You walk a few steps farther and find a wooden bench tucked beneath an arch. You imagine sitting there, rubbing your hands together, trying to coax even a little heat back into your fingers. That is when you start to understand something simple but essential. Medieval people did not fight the cold the way we do. They did not expect to eliminate it. They expected to coexist with it. Warmth was something you built layer by layer, habit by habit, space by space, rather than flipping a switch on a thermostat. Your footsteps guide you through another narrow doorway, and you start to sense the shape of medieval life forming around you. Every corner offered a tiny strategy for warmth. Every object, whether a blanket or a brazier, had to justify its existence during winter. Comfort came in small victories. Even tiny ones mattered. You pause, noticing how your own body begins to anticipate the next source of warmth, even in imagination. That instinct is as old as humanity, and as the castle grows darker behind you, you step forward again, letting the story continue to unfold, one cold stone at a time. You follow the faint glow ahead, and soon the corridor opens into a space that feels surprisingly alive. It is warmer here, not warm in any modern sense, but warm for a medieval castle, which means your shoulders loosen a little, and your breath no longer fogs in front of you quite as sharply. The reason becomes obvious the moment your eyes drift toward the center of the chamber. A brazier glows on a low tripod, filled with burning charcoal that gives off a deep, steady heat. You can almost feel your skin flutter with relief as you step closer. Fire is your first shield against the castle's cold. Every knight, every servant, every guest gravitated toward it in winter. A medieval castle could hold dozens of fireplaces, and yet somehow never enough to satisfy the people living there. The stone walls swallowed heat faster than the flames could give it. Still, fire was the heart of medieval life. It lit meals, warmed hands, soothed aching muscles, and filled long nights with a soft crackling that almost counted as company. You lean in toward the brazier and hear a faint hiss as a piece of charcoal shifts. The smell is earthy and smoky, but not unpleasant. Charcoal was prized exactly for that. It burned hotter and cleaner than raw wood, so indoor braziers were less smoky than open fires. This is your mainstream historical fact for this section. Many medieval rooms relied on charcoal braziers because they provided consistent heat without filling the chamber with thick, choking fumes. They were not perfect, but they were the closest thing medieval people had to a space heater. You stretch your hands toward the warmth. It is easy to imagine a knight doing the same after a day outside. Picture him returning from patrol, fingers stiff and red, the metal of his gauntlets cold enough to sting even through the padding. He would crouch over a brazier like this one, muttering under his breath while shuffling closer and closer until someone warned him not to scorch his cloak. As you circle the room, your eyes settle on the massive fireplace at the far wall. It towers above you, carved into the stone like a gateway. You step onto the hearth, feeling bits of grit beneath your boots. The fire inside is low now, just glowing logs and a few flickering flames, but it gives the entire space a gentle orange heartbeat. You can imagine this fireplace roaring to life in the evening, casting shadows across tapestries, making armor shine like molten silver. There is a quirky detail you cannot help remembering. Some households kept a long-handled spoon or paddle specifically designed to poke under the logs and help them flare back to life. The job sometimes went to the youngest servant, who was expected to perform this almost like a ritual every morning. It sounds like a simple task, but in winter, when fire meant survival, the responsibility was real. Imagine a half-asleep teenager with freezing fingers, being told to coax life out of embers at dawn, while everyone else grumbled that it was still too cold. You step away from the fireplace and wander toward a narrow window slit. Even here, you can feel why fire mattered. Winter winds slide through the stone, like they have a right to be there. The flame behind you dances slightly as the draft brushes past it. It is no wonder fire was at the center of social life. It was the one place where the cold could not push you around quite as easily. Another thought drifts through your mind. Historians still argue whether certain fireplaces were designed primarily for warmth, or whether they also played a role in controlling smoke from the lower levels of the castle. Some theories propose that certain chimney designs acted like vertical ventilation shafts, helping to carry smoke upward and out of multiple floors. Others argue it was just accidental overlap created by changing architecture. Either way, the results were inconsistent. Sometimes the system worked beautifully. Sometimes it sent smoke drifting into the wrong rooms, like an uninvited guest. You take one more slow step toward the center of the chamber. There is something calming about being near a medieval fire. The rhythm of crackles and pops, the shadows swaying across stone, the way the warmth ebbs and flows like a soft tide. You can almost imagine the other senses that would have joined it. The smell of burning oak, the faint gritty taste of smoke settling on your lips, the rough grain of the wooden bench under your palms as you sit closer. You let yourself settle on that imaginary bench. You picture a group of people around you, some knights, some servants, all wrapped in cloaks and layers. Someone holds out their boots to dry after trudging through snow. Someone else pokes at the fire with a piece of iron that has probably been used for the same purpose for generations. A pot hangs over the flame, steaming faintly. Maybe it is porridge. Maybe it is a simple onion stew. Either way, the warmth rising from that pot is as comforting as any blanket. One knight leans over the brazier, letting warmth soak into his face. Another rubs his hands together, as if trying to generate fire through sheer stubbornness. A third sits with his back to the hearth, letting heat seep into the thick wool of his cloak. The idea of modern heating would astonish them, but this, right here, was enough to get them through winter nights that would make you shiver just thinking about them. You glance toward the ceiling, noticing a faint haze of smoke gathering near the rafters. Medieval ventilation was never perfect. In many rooms, smoke simply rose until it drifted out through small openings or found its way through gaps in the stone. People just lived with it, blinking through irritations and coughing occasionally. If the fire warmed you, you forgave a bit of smoke in your eyes. Your gaze drifts back to the brazier. It glows steadily, a patient little sun. In some castles, these braziers were moved from room to room. A knight might ask a servant to bring one to his chamber before bed, or a group of workers might carry one out into the courtyard during chores. It was warmth on demand, medieval style. You reach down as though to warm your fingers again, and a small breeze brushes your cheek. The fire responds instantly, popping and shifting. You realize something important. Medieval heating was not just about flames. It was about the dance between heat and airflow. Every draft changed the mood of a room. Every gust mattered. The flames flicker lower, turning from orange to deep red. You take a step back, letting the fire remain behind you like a companion rather than a focus. The chill begins to reassert itself the moment you move away. That was life here. Warm circles surrounded by cold edges. But you keep walking, because this castle has more to show you, more warmth hidden in odd corners and clever tricks. The embers glow one last time as you slip into the next hallway, carrying their warmth with you only in memory. You step away from the dying glow of the brazier and drift into a quieter corridor where the cold rises again like a tide. It curls around your ankles and sneaks under your clothing, and suddenly you understand why layers were not just clothing in medieval life, but a full-time strategy. As you walk, you feel the imagined weight of wool settling across your shoulders, the softer press of linen beneath it, and the heavier fur cloak draped on top like a final shield. Every thread mattered, every fold trapped a pocket of heat, and every knight learned that the simplest way to survive a freezing castle was to turn your own body into a tiny, mobile furnace. The air smells faintly of lanolin, that warm and slightly earthy scent natural wool carries even after washing. You run your fingers along a hanging cloak left on a wooden peg. It feels scratchy, thick, and honest, in a way modern fabrics rarely do. You picture a knight shrugging into something similar at dawn, tugging it tight across his chest with the practiced motion of someone who knows exactly which part of the castle will be coldest before breakfast. A familiar truth from surviving records comes to mind. Many medieval garments were intentionally oversized so that air could gather between the layers. That trapped air became insulation, turning a single night into a walking stack of tiny personal climates. It is not glamorous, but it works astonishingly well. You can feel the logic of it pressing against your skin as you imagine the linen underlayer warming first, then the wool above it absorbing moisture, then the cloak sealing everything in. As you continue, your fingers graze a wall-mounted chest where spare garments might once have been stored. A peculiar detail from old household inventories surfaces in your thoughts. Some wealthier castles listed garments made from beaver felt or squirrel fur, lined with soft sheepskin. It sounds luxurious, but the strange part is that several inventories describe these pieces being used not for fashion, but as nightwear. Imagine climbing into bed wearing what essentially amounts to a full fur-lined coat, because that was how badly the cold could bite. Your steps echo lightly as you move into a chamber where the walls feel closer and the air warmer. You sense why this room might have been popular on winter evenings. There are pegs along one wall where cloaks and tunics would have been hung to dry or warm near heated stones. The smell of wool mingles with the faint memory of smoke. You imagine a line of garments steaming gently after a snow-filled patrol, each dripping faintly onto the stone. A soft draft brushes your cheek, and you reach up to tighten your imagined hood. You cannot help noticing how medieval clothing required awareness. Every tie mattered, every clasp had a purpose. A hood could be pulled low to shield your ears, and sleeves could be wrapped or doubled to protect your wrists. A belt was not only for carrying pouches but for tucking layers tightly at the waist so heat did not escape upward. Clothing was less about appearance and more about survival. You run your palm over a folded woolen tunic placed on a wooden bench. The fibers feel coarse but reliable. Linen beneath it would have been smoother, breathable, and easier to wash. A few surviving scraps from the period reveal something interesting. The linen layer often had reinforced underarms because sweat built up even in the cold. It is easy to forget that warmth is not always comfortable. Sometimes it meant a damp inner shirt and the constant need to balance insulation with breathability. A theory from textile historians occasionally surfaces in discussions about medieval clothing. Some believe that particular stitching techniques, especially in padded garments like gambesons, were intentionally arranged to trap heat more evenly across the torso. Others suggest the patterns were simply aesthetic or structural. It is one of those debates with no definitive conclusion, but as you imagine the thick, quilted padding beneath a knight's armor, you can easily imagine how its layered construction doubled as winter protection, long before anyone talked about thermal engineering. You step forward, adjusting your cloak again. The movement reminds you of how knights wore multiple layers, even under armor. A padded gambeson came first, then sometimes a hauberk of mail, then a surcoat of wool or linen. Each added layer captured warmth. Even the armor itself, though cold to the touch, would eventually warm from body heat, turning the whole outfit into an unintentional but effective thermal shell after an hour of marching. The room around you feels smaller now, as though pulling you deeper into its warmth. You picture a row of knights resting here, peeling off their outer cloaks, shaking snow from their shoulders, comparing whose wool smelled the most like wet sheep. Someone chuckles. Someone else complains that his cloak never dries properly. A squire moves along the wall, collecting damp garments to place near the fire. The atmosphere is cozy in a crude, practical way. Everyone smells like wool, smoke, and slightly sour sweat, but the warmth binds them more than any perfume ever could. You shift your weight and feel the imaginary weight of the clothing settling more firmly around you. Wool scratches your neck, linen hugs your elbows, a cloak tugs your shoulders down slightly. These sensations make you notice how medieval people accepted heaviness as a form of comfort. Lightweight fabrics simply did not exist. Warmth had mass, warmth had texture, warmth had a smell. As you walk toward the doorway, the air cools again, and you instinctively pull the cloak tighter. That reaction is exactly what medieval knights lived with every winter. Clothing was not optional armor against the cold. It was the first and most constant line of defense. You pause at the threshold, letting the last bit of imagined warmth press against your back. The castle beyond is dark, and you can feel a familiar chill beckoning you forward. You step into it anyway, wrapped in your many layers, ready to discover how else these people outwitted the cold. You move deeper into the castle, and the stone floor beneath your feet shifts from cold to almost comfortable as you enter a long hall covered with thick layers of rushes. They rustle softly when you step across them, releasing a faint, earthy scent of dried grass mixed with herbs. The moment your boots touch this makeshift carpet, you feel how different the room becomes. The chill that once crept straight through the soles of your shoes now softens, diverted by the fragile but clever cushioning spread beneath you. Rushes were more than simple floor covering. They acted as an insulator, a deodorizer, and a quieting pad all at once. As you walk, The floor feels like a forest path brought indoors, creaking gently under your steps. The castle suddenly feels less like an echoing stone shell and more like a home. You imagine the ease this brought to weary knights who had just trudged through sleet or mud. Their feet would sink a little into the rushes, grateful for something that did not bite with cold. A well-known detail from household accounts of the period tells us that the rushes were not simply dumped onto the floor, they were layered carefully. First came a dense mat of older stalks, then a fresh layer, often sprinkled with dried lavender, marjoram, wormwood, or even mint. The effect was partly practical and partly aesthetic. The herbs masked unpleasant odors, discouraged pests, and gave rooms a comforting fragrance that rose each time someone crossed the floor. Imagine stepping into a hall scented subtly with crushed greenery every winter morning. It was the closest thing medieval people had to an essential oil diffuser. You crouch and brush your hand across the rushes. They feel crisp at the tips, softer near the base. The motion stirs up a hint of dusty sweetness. As you straighten, you picture servants hauling in bundles of fresh reeds several times a year. In winter, the task became even more important because dampness seeped everywhere. The better the rushes, the less heat the floor stole from the room. Some households even experimented with thicker underlayers to improve insulation, hinting at early attempts to control indoor climate long before modern technology. You continue forward, listening to the faint whisper of stalks shifting beneath you. It creates a gentle soundscape, something between a sigh and a shuffle, softening the harsh acoustics of stone. With fewer echoes, conversations felt warmer. A simple innovation, but one that shaped the daily life of everyone inside these walls. Near a small side chamber, you notice the rushes grow thinner, exposing bare stone beneath patches that have been worn down by heavy footsteps. Your boots tap sharply here, and the cold immediately pushes upward. You feel again why the rushes mattered. They offered not just warmth, but sound comfort. Without them, every step in a castle might have echoed like a drum, harsh and loud in the long winter nights. A small wooden rake leans against the wall, reminding you of a curious detail mentioned in a few period descriptions. Sometimes, workers would comb through the rushes daily to redistribute them, shake out debris, and refresh the sprigs of herbs. This little ritual kept the rooms from becoming too musty. It is the kind of tiny, repetitive task that rarely appears in heroic stories about knights, but describes daily life far more accurately. You pause by a crackling sound ahead. A servant in this imaginary space might be sweeping aside older rushes, creating a small pile. You can almost hear the scrape of wood against stone as he gathers the used stalks. Old rushes became fuel for small fires, bedding material for animals, or padding stuffed into makeshift cushions. Nothing went to waste. In a world where warmth was precious, even trampled reeds had value. The walls here feel closer, and the ceiling dips lower. The room ahead likely served as a private gathering space or a sleeping chamber. Rushes often grew thicker in such areas, laid down in deeper piles to keep the sleeping quarters warmer at night. You step across a particularly dense patch and feel your boots sink slightly. The ground seems softer, warmer, almost plush. You imagine lying down on a layered surface like this, wrapped in wool blankets, hearing the faint rustle each time you shifted. A detail occasionally noted in archaeological findings suggests that some households mixed in moss or straw for extra softness, creating a more cushioned base. This idea fascinates you. It hints at regional variation and personal preference in a time long before standardized comfort. Some wanted simple reeds, others wanted layers thick enough to soften even the hardest winter gusts. It reveals something human and tender about people who often seem distant in our imagination. You walk farther into the room, studying the way the rushes press down in certain places. Those flattened trails tell silent stories. Here is where servants walked with jugs of warm ale. There is where a knight paced restlessly after returning from a patrol. Another spot sinks into a wide oval shape, as though someone sat there night after night by a small fire, piling rushes around their feet for warmth. A note from one old manuscript even hints that households sometimes dyed the upper layer of rushes with natural pigments to add a touch of decoration. Whether this was true or merely poetic exaggeration is uncertain, but the image of golden or muted green reeds, brightening the grey interior of a medieval castle, is charming enough that you want to believe it. After all, medieval people found beauty wherever they could, even in practical materials. You move toward a narrow corner where the rushes taper to almost nothing. The stone here looks damp, reflecting the faintest sheen. Cold rises from it like breath. You imagine the frustration of living with such stubborn conditions. Floors needed constant attention. Damp rushes brought mold. Dry rushes brought dust. The balance was delicate, and every household managed it differently. A cluster of herbs scattered over the reeds draws your eye. You kneel to inspect them. The dried leaves crumble softly under your touch. Someone placed them here intentionally, perhaps to freshen this corner or discourage insects. Household guides from the period mention mixtures with specific purposes, like mint for scent or wormwood to deter fleas. It is a reminder that warmth and cleanliness were never separate goals. They were deeply intertwined. You stand and take one last slow breath. The rush-scented air gives the room a gentle, lived-in feeling. You can imagine the texture under sleeping bodies, the fragrance rising in the morning, the insulation protecting bare feet from the misery of winter stone. It is another simple but brilliant adaptation, one that shaped the atmosphere of nearly every hall and chamber in castles across Europe. You step toward the doorway, leaving behind the muffled softness of the rush-covered floor. The sensation lingers under your boots like a memory of warmth, and you brace yourself for the sharper cold beyond. The moment you cross into the next corridor, the stone greets you with a familiar chill, urging you onward in search of the next hidden secret of medieval warmth. You follow the corridor until a warm, savory scent slips quietly into the air, drifting toward you like an invitation. After the brittle chill of the stone passages, the smell feels almost miraculous. It reminds you instantly that in a medieval castle, heat did not come only from fires and clothing. It also came from food, heavy, steaming, fragrant food. You turn a corner and feel the air shift. It becomes richer, thicker, warmer against your cheeks. The castle kitchen must be close. You step into a broad space where the ceiling climbs high enough to vanish into shadow. Long wooden tables fill the center, and a massive cauldron hangs over a fire that hums with steady heat. Even though you know the scene is only in your imagination, the warmth radiating from that pot is so vivid, you almost raise your hands toward it. The scent is unmistakable, something broth-like, thickened with barley, onions, maybe a handful of root vegetables. You inhale slowly, and the comfort of it settles into your chest like a soft blanket. Food was warmth in the most literal way. A bowl of hot stew could turn a winter evening from miserable to manageable. Surviving records from household accounts mention how kitchens worked tirelessly through winter to produce dishes with high fat and high calorie content. It was not indulgence, it was insulation in edible form. Heat from inside the body tended to last longer than the glow of any brazier, and the people who lived in these castles understood that instinctively. You wander closer to the fire. A ladle rests against the rim of the cauldron. You pick it up, feeling the imagined warmth of the handle through your palm. You tilt it gently, and the stew inside glistens with a faint sheen from melted animal fat. It is thick, almost heavy, exactly the kind of meal that stays with you for hours after the last bite. You picture a knight coming off a long patrol, armor cold, breath sharp, fingers numb. He would sit down with a bowl like this and feel the warmth spreading from his stomach into his limbs until even his toes tingled. You cannot help thinking of a small detail noted in a medieval cookery manuscript. Some households stirred ground spices into winter stews, not for luxury, but for the warming effects believed to come from ingredients like ginger or pepper. To modern ears, it sounds like an early version of comfort food, a touch of spice, a burst of heat, a reminder that even in the darkest season, something could still stir warmth inside you. Your steps draw you toward the long table. Some wooden bowls sit stacked neatly beside a pitcher of warm ale. You run your fingers across the rim of one bowl. The wood feels smooth, worn by years of use. You imagine servants carrying these bowls through the great hall, steam curling above them, the warmth drifting in fragrant plumes toward the people waiting eagerly at the tables. Somewhere in your memory arises a peculiar anecdote mentioned in a traveller's observations of the period. During especially brutal winters, some households baked thick slabs of bread designed specifically to soak up hot broth. Not fancy bread, not delicate bread, but sturdy slices that functioned like edible heat sponges. They absorbed warmth, softened in the stew, and delivered heat directly into the body. The idea is strangely charming, a reminder that people have always found creative ways to fight the cold, even if it meant weaponizing carbohydrates. You take a few more steps, listening to the quiet bubbling of the cauldron. The sound is soothing, repetitive, a gentle reminder of survival. You picture cooks bustling around this room hours earlier, chopping vegetables, stirring pots, laughing, complaining about the smoke stinging their eyes, and tasting spoonfuls of broth until they were satisfied it would warm the bones of every person in the hall. The walls of the kitchen are darkened with centuries of soot. You trace a finger along a stone block and feel the imagined grit of old smoke. A detail from architectural studies often surfaces when discussing medieval kitchens. Some researchers suggest that certain kitchens were intentionally placed near strategic parts of the castle, so the heat from the cooking fires would seep into adjacent chambers, subtly warming living spaces. Others think it might have been accidental, merely the result of limited design options. There is no consensus, but the possibility adds a gentle sense of intention to these old stones. You turn and take in the layout of the room once more. The hearth dominates everything. This space would have been the warmest place in the entire castle, sometimes hot enough that workers removed layers even in the dead of winter. Standing here now, you almost forget how cold the corridors were only moments ago. Heat lingers in this room like a living presence, pulsing steadily from the fire. You step closer to the cauldron again and peer into the simmering mixture. The surface ripples softly as tiny bubbles rise from the bottom. You imagine the ingredients swirling together, absorbing flavors, thickening into something that would have sustained exhausted knights, sleepy squires, and servants working from dawn to dusk. The heat rising from the pot strokes your face with a comforting touch. The kitchen is not quiet now. You can hear the ghosts of earlier activity, the scrape of knives on a cutting board, the thump of someone kneading dough, the clatter of a wooden spoon against the side of a pot, the murmured chatter of workers trading stories or complaints. This room was the castle's heartbeat, and in winter, its warmth made it feel almost sacred. You picture a knight stepping into this room at night, drawn by the promise of heat. He might stand near the hearth, just to thaw his fingers, trying not to get in the way of the cook. Maybe he sneaks a piece of bread from the corner of a table. Maybe the cook pretends not to notice, because everyone knows winter makes thieves of the hungry and the cold. You look toward a small alcove, where barrels of salted meat rest in tidy rows. Their presence reminds you of another practical truth. Winter meals relied heavily on preserved foods. Salting, smoking, and drying allowed meat to last for months. Paired with root vegetables stored in cool cellars, these ingredients formed the foundation of winter sustenance. Not glamorous, but sustaining. The kind of meals that fill the belly with slow-burning energy, perfect for surviving long nights. The warmth in this room settles on your skin with a soft persistence. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the imagined heat seep into your palms. You feel the slight sting of a warm fire after being cold for too long. You hear the crackle of wood, the bubbling of broth, the faint tap of boiling liquid inside the cauldron. When you finally step away from the warmth of the hearth, the cold beyond the kitchen feels sharper, almost offended that you dared leave its reach. But as you walk down the corridor again, you carry that heat within your imagination, lingering like the last bite of a good meal, warmth from the inside. It is a simple idea, yet one that kept medieval knights from freezing as the darkness of winter pressed against every stone of the castle. You turn toward another corner of the corridor, the warmth fading from your skin but steady in your memory. Ahead waits another piece of medieval ingenuity, another way these people found to soften the harsh bite of winter. You move away from the warmth of the kitchen and into a narrower hallway that twists slightly before opening into a small chamber. The moment you step across the threshold, the air changes. It feels still, hushed, and noticeably less frigid than the corridor behind you. The room is not heated by a blazing fire or busy cauldron. Instead, the warmth here comes from something subtler, the way the space is shaped, tucked tightly between thicker walls, cut away from drafts, and positioned so cleverly that heat pools inside like quiet, hidden treasure. Knights knew these pockets well. Every castle had them, rooms that were not grand or ornate, but strategically cozy. You cross the chamber, hearing only the soft pad of your footsteps. The ceiling dips low enough that the warmth stays closer to the ground. The stone walls curve inward slightly, reducing corners where cold air could gather. A tiny slit window, positioned with precision, lets in only a thin ribbon of light. The result is a room that feels almost insulated despite being built of the same icy stone that chills the rest of the castle. You rest your palm against the wall and sense how the temperature feels muted here. Not warm exactly, but calmer, thicker, gentler. A frequent observation in studies of castle design notes that smaller rooms near the inner core of the structure often held heat better than the grand halls. The surrounding stone acted like a thermal buffer. Warm breath, candlelight, body heat, even the warmth rising from adjacent floors below, could linger here longer. A wooden bench sits against one wall, its surface worn smooth. You picture a knight settling onto it after a long day, pulling off damp gloves and sighing with relief at the mild, quiet warmth. He might light a single beeswax candle, its small flame glowing softly. The room would brighten just enough for him to write a letter or polish a piece of gear. Candle flames were not strong heaters, but in a space this compact, even a single flame mattered. A cluster of candles could raise the temperature a surprising amount, especially when paired with the heat of a living, breathing human. You lower yourself onto the bench and imagine the faint warmth radiating from a heated stone someone might have brought here earlier. Some accounts from daily castle routines mention how residents heated stones near the kitchen or hearth and carried them wrapped in cloth to smaller chambers. These stones released gentle warmth for hours, transforming tiny rooms into modest retreats. You imagine your fingers resting on such a stone, the heat pulsing slowly into your skin like a heartbeat. Near the corner lies a small wooden chest. You lift the lid and find fabric folded neatly inside, perhaps spare blankets, extra cloaks, or winter hoods. A curious mention in medieval inventories describes how some households allocated specific rooms for drying garments and warming bedding. These warm pockets of space served double duty. They were workrooms during the day and private retreats at night. You picture clothing draped over a wooden frame, slowly losing the dampness from the icy air outside. You look upward and notice the ceiling beams, low and tightly set. Their placement is not random. Lower ceilings preserved warmth far better than the cavernous great halls. The geometry did half the work. Heat rose, but because it did not have far to climb, it held close to the people using the room. You breathe in slowly, imagining the air being slightly warmer than the corridor just beyond the doorway. One corner contains a narrow alcove with a shallow stone shelf. A small clay lamp sits there. When lit, that lamp would have offered both light and a whisper of warmth. Texts describing domestic life sometimes mention that these lamps, especially when used in groups, could transform a quiet chamber into a pleasantly warm nook during the coldest nights. Not enough to ward off frost entirely, but enough to take the sting out of the air. You step toward the inner wall and rest your fingers along a seam in the stone. The wall here feels thicker, likely backed by another room behind it. A subtle detail from castle design research suggests that chambers placed between other rooms or beneath upper floors tended to retain warmth far better. The shared heat bled gently through stone. In frigid months, a knight might choose to sleep in such a chamber even if it was not his usual quarters, simply because the air tasted less icy. A folded woolen cloak lies draped across the bench. The fabric is heavy, smelling faintly of lanolin and smoke. You picture a knight curling up inside the cloak while leaning against the warmer side of the wall. Maybe he listens to the faint murmur of servants in the hallway or to the muffled crackle of a distant fireplace. These small chambers were refuges not just from cold, but also from noise, chaos, and the constant demands of castle life. You take a breath and notice the stillness in the air. There is no whistling draft, no sudden gust, no echo. Everything feels weighed down and hushed. This room has a softness that the larger spaces envy. It is easy to imagine medieval residents turning to such places whenever winter tightened its grip. Even a night spent here would feel warmer than hours spent in the grand hall, where flames roared but drafts bit from every corner. Another quiet detail emerges as you glance around. Some rooms were intentionally clustered around stairwells or thick structural columns. These architectural features absorbed warmth from fires below, radiating it upward. The heated stones functioned almost like primitive thermal batteries. You imagine placing your hand against one of those columns and feeling a whisper of warmth traveling up through it. You sit again for a moment, letting the quiet envelop you. The room feels like an interior pocket stitched into the castle's massive body, sheltering warmth the way a glove shelters a hand. You imagine a knight closing the wooden door behind him, savoring the first few breaths of gentler air. Maybe he removes his boots here, so the cold does not follow him into sleep. Maybe he rolls out a simple woolen blanket onto the floor and lies down in the corner where warmth lingers longest. You rise slowly, taking one last look at this small haven. The warmth in this chamber might not impress anyone today, but for those who lived here centuries ago, it made winter survivable. You step toward the doorway, feeling the cold waiting for you in the corridor beyond. The chamber behind you holds its breath, keeping the warmth for whoever seeks it next. You step out and let the cold nip at you again, ready to unravel the next secret of staying warm in a frozen castle. You continue down the corridor until you reach a wide wooden door, its surface worn smooth by countless hands. When you push it open, a wave of warm, shared air rolls toward you. It is not the fierce heat of a fireplace or the close warmth of a tiny chamber. It is something softer, gentler, built from breath, bodies, wool, and togetherness. You step inside and understand immediately why knights relied on communal living spaces during the coldest months. Sometimes, the simplest source of warmth was each other. The room stretches wide enough to hold several people comfortably, yet the ceiling dips low, capturing warmth close to the floor. Several straw-stuffed mattresses lie scattered around, each covered with thick blankets, sheepskins, or old cloaks. You walk across the floor, hearing the faint crunch of straw beneath some of the bedding. The air feels warmer here because the room is meant to be full. Full of sleepers, full of sighs, full of the subtle heat a dozen bodies can produce when packed in close. A familiar observation from accounts of castle life lingers in your mind. Rooms like this were rarely empty during winter. People shared space by necessity. Knights, squires, servants, even visiting travelers. Sometimes all slept in groups, not for social bonding, though that certainly happened, but to preserve warmth. A room filled with people could be several degrees warmer than an empty one, and in the harshest months, that difference mattered immensely. You move farther inside and picture the room at night. The door shut, the shutters drawn, 2 or 3 candles flickering along the walls. The smell of wool fills the space, mixed with faint sweat, smoke, the grassy scent of straw, and the slight tang of leather drying near the wall. It is not glamorous, but it is undeniably human. You imagine settling down beside others, hearing the low murmur of whispered conversations blending with the soft rustle of blankets. A curious note from various medieval descriptions suggests that people often slept fully clothed during winter. The layers you wore during the day stayed on at night, trapping your body heat inside the communal nest. Someone wearing only a thin shift would have been considered reckless. In a castle, warmth was a collective effort, and the smart ones knew how to keep it. You pause near a cluster of bedding arranged close together. The mattresses are low, simple bundles of straw tied with rope. You sit on one and feel it shift beneath your weight, rustling softly. It warms quickly because straw traps heat with surprising efficiency. Some residents even used herbs like rosemary or lavender between the layers of straw. These additions created a soft scent and helped deter insects, a small touch that made the sleep more pleasant. Along one wall, you spot a series of hooks, where cloaks hang in thick clusters. When many people gathered in a single room, they often hung their outerwear near the walls, so the inner circle remained warmer. The combined insulation of each cloak created a sort of makeshift barrier against drafts. You touch one of the heavy cloaks and imagine it still holding warmth from someone's shoulders, its wool felted from years of wear and winter moisture. You look toward the far end of the room where a narrow slit window is tightly shuttered. It is sealed with wooden cloth to keep the cold at bay. During winter nights, residents stuffed every crack with whatever soft materials they had. Extra scraps of wool, dried moss, linen rags. These little efforts transformed the room into something that genuinely held warmth. You can almost feel the difference. The air thicker and still, the cold kept politely outside rather than barging through the walls. A small pile of stones sits near the corner, wrapped in cloth. They were likely warmed earlier in a hearth. Someone carried them here and tucked them under blankets before sleep. These stones would release slow, gentle heat for hours. You imagine a knight cradling one near his chest, absorbing the warmth into his bones after a long day of patrols. The stones are smooth under your fingertips as you pass them, still holding the memory of warmth even now. You picture the room as dawn approaches, the candles long extinguished, the air thick with shared breath, the quiet sound of people shifting in their blankets. A servant might slip in to add fresh straw or shake out a damp cloak. Light creeps through a corner of the shutter, pale and cold. A few early risers stir, rubbing their eyes, pulling on boots, whispering to avoid waking the others. Communal warmth has carried them through another night. You notice how the room seems to hug you. The walls are not too far apart, and the lingering sense of bodies nearby feels almost comforting. This is warmth created by humanity itself. No fancy trick required, just proximity, trust, and the quiet acceptance that winter was too strong to face alone. A detail from social histories lingers in your thoughts. Some accounts mention how people often rotated sleeping positions in the night. That way, no one stayed near the cold outer edges for too long. It was an informal system, developed naturally, without rules or orders, just an understanding that everyone deserved a chance at the warm center. The simplicity of the gesture feels profound. Even warriors, hardened by battles and trained for conflict, understood the value of fairness when warmth was at stake. You walk toward the center of the room, imagining yourself settling into the circle of sleeping shapes. Someone gently snores. Another shifts, mumbling in dreams. A handful of soft breaths rise and fall in a rhythm older than the castle itself. You feel how the room breathes with its inhabitants, gathering warmth slowly through the night and releasing it reluctantly in the morning. When you finally step back toward the door, you feel the cold waiting outside, pressing against the threshold. You take one last breath of the shared warmth that lingers behind you, soft and human. Then you push the door open and slip into the corridor again, the chill wrapping around you like a reminder that winter is never far, and that warmth, in a castle like this, often depends on the people you huddle beside. You move forward, ready to discover the next way medieval knights tamed the frozen heart of their stone home. You walk back into the main corridor, feeling the cold stretch its fingers across your skin again. It creeps under your collar, curls around your wrists, and tries to settle between your shoulder blades. But ahead, you see a faint pulse of golden light flickering against the stone. You follow it, turning a corner, and suddenly you enter a space so large and so brilliant that it feels like stepping into a different world. This is the Great Hall, the heart of the castle, the place where fire grew bold and bright enough to challenge winter itself. The hall rises high above your head, its ceiling lost in darkness. Banquet tables stretch across the stone floor. The air smells of smoke, old wood, and a lingering trace of roasted meat from meals long past. But what captures your attention instantly is the colossal fireplace dominating the far wall. It is not just big, it is monumental. You could stand inside it without ducking. A fire roars within, logs the size of small trees stacked in a careful arrangement. Sparks leap upward in wild, joyful bursts, dancing into the vast space above. The heat rolls outward in heavy waves, reaching you even across the width of the hall. You walk closer, feeling your cheeks warm, your palms tingle, and the chill dissolve from your bones. A widely recognized detail from surviving architectural studies notes that fireplaces in great halls were not just for comfort, they were engineered statements of power. A massive hearth symbolized wealth, authority, and stability. Only a well-provisioned lord could afford to burn that much wood in winter. As you stand before the blaze, you can feel that intention. This is not an ordinary fire, it is a declaration. You step nearer. The fire pops loudly as sap bursts inside the logs. The noise echoes through the hall, bouncing off stone walls and high rafters. You imagine a group of knights gathered around, their armor glinting in the shifting glow. Servants move past carrying platters, while musicians rest near a side wall, warming their fingers before playing. The fire turns every shadow into a flickering shape, making the hall feel alive, even when empty. You kneel for a moment near the hearth. The warmth is almost overwhelming this close. It bakes into your skin, flows through your clothing, chases away memories of the cold corridors behind you. The heat rises in spirals, pulled upward by the chimney above. Medieval chimneys were impressive feats of engineering for their time, though not always perfect. In some castles, smoke drifted into upper galleries, clinging to tapestries and darkening rafters. For all its beauty, the great hall fire sometimes behaved like a stubborn guest who refused to leave politely. You turn slightly to take in the room. Where the fire's glow does not reach, the cold lurks quietly. Even the largest blaze cannot warm every corner of a hall this size. You can almost see the invisible boundary where heat fades into chill. People in medieval times understood this well. They gathered close to the flames not just for comfort, but for survival. The best seats, naturally, belonged to the lord and honored guests. As you move along the hall, you notice how much colder it becomes the moment you step away from the hearth. A curious observation appears in a few old descriptions of winter feasts. Servants sometimes carried small embers in covered trays to help warm the hands of performers or attendants standing far from the fire. Picture a minstrel rubbing his fingers over the tray before playing his lute, or a messenger, half frozen from the ride, clutching the warmth while waiting for an audience with the lord. These tiny gestures meant everything when the wind howled outside. You pause before a long table set with heavy chairs. The firelight glows across the surface, making the wood shine like polished amber. You imagine the hall filled with people on a winter night. Voices rise, Laughter echoes. Goblets clink together. Every sound is swallowed partially by the height of the room, spreading upward in warm waves. The environment becomes a living insulation, a shared expression of warmth built from fire, bodies, and celebration. Some researchers examining castle remains have suggested that the placement of large fireplaces was not arbitrary. Certain halls show signs that builders adjusted angles so heat would radiate along the length of the room rather than simply blast outward. Whether intentional design or lucky coincidence, the effect can be felt now as you receive a steady flow of warmth while still standing several paces away. But even with such clever positioning, the Great Hall was a place of extremes. Hot near the fire, cold at the edges. You walk toward the side wall, and the temperature drops noticeably. A breath escapes your lips in a faint cloud. The contrast makes you appreciate how medieval people lived constantly between comfort and discomfort, solving problems with the tools they had. You glance upward again. High above, near the rafters, the ceiling disappears into shadow. The firelight dances across carved beams and banners, reminding you that night after night, winter after winter, generations of people gathered here to warm themselves against the season's bite. The Great Hall was not just a dining chamber, it was a winter refuge, a place where fire hit its most dramatic stride and where warmth gathered with a communal pulse. You step back toward the hearth, letting the heat press against your skin once more. It feels like stepping into sunlight on a winter morning. You can almost feel layers of cold peeling away from your body. Knights must have known this feeling intimately. They would approach the fire, hands outstretched, cheeks flushed, eyes squinting at the brightness. They would laugh, argue, trade stories, sharpen blades, or simply stand in silence, letting the fire soak into their bones. A small pile of split logs rests near the hearth. You pick one up. It is heavy, rough, cold. You imagine servants hauling countless logs each day, keeping the fire alive. The Great Hall consumed wood like a living creature. Feeding it was a full-time job. As the fire crackles behind you, you step away slowly, drawn toward a dimmer corner of the hall. The warmth fades again, but the glow stays with you. You walk quietly, feeling the shift from blazing comfort back into cool stone. Ahead waits the door to another corridor, another place where medieval ingenuity softened the harsh rules of winter. You take a final glance at the massive fire, its flames dancing with wild confidence, before slipping once more into the waiting cold. You step through the door at the far end of the Great Hall, leaving behind the roaring hearth and slipping back into the familiar embrace of the castle's cold arteries. The corridor stretches ahead like a stone spine, narrowing, turning, bending around corners in ways that almost feel intentional. As you take your first few steps, you notice something peculiar. The air here swirls. It twists around your legs, slides past your shoulders, nudges the back of your neck. These stone hallways have a personality, and tonight it feels mischievous. Drafts inside a medieval castle were more than just inconvenient. They were practically residents in their own right. You feel one now, a thin thread of cold snaking out from a corner you did not even look at. It curls around your ankle in a sly whisper. You tug your cloak tighter, even though you know it will not help much. A set of torches flickers along the wall, their flames trembling as air pulses through the corridor. You slow down, noticing how certain sections of the hallway seem warmer or colder, depending on their shape. Narrow stretches squeeze the air until it whistles softly. Wider alcoves hold pockets of stillness that feel strangely comforting. You realize that these shifting temperatures were not an accident. Even if medieval builders did not always understand the physics behind air movement, they certainly observed its behavior. One widely accepted observation from historical architecture is that castles often developed natural airflow patterns because of their complex layouts. Multiple floors, staircases, arrow slits, and ventilation gaps turned the entire structure into an enormous maze where warm and cold currents wrestled constantly. Some areas became funnels, pulling cold air with surprising force. Others held warmth like gentle nests. You walk deeper. The corridor dips slightly, and as you descend, you feel the cold intensify. The walls seem to breathe frost. You run your fingertips along the stone and feel how its surface drinks in your warmth instantly. A long, narrow passage ahead creates a tunnel of cold so sharp it sends a shiver down your spine. You imagine knights marching through this exact passage during winter, shuffling quickly, muttering under their breath about the castle's stubborn personality. As you round a corner, the draft shifts direction. Instead of coming from behind, it suddenly meets you head-on, as though the castle is exhaling right into your face. The gust carries with it the faint scent of old wood and something mineral, almost metallic. Castle corridors often funneled air upward from storage rooms, kitchens, or stables. You can practically taste the mixture of scents blending together. You pause beneath a small, arched opening high in the wall. The gap is barely wider than your hand, yet it pulls air through with surprising determination. A few architectural notes propose that such openings may have served multiple functions. Some provided ventilation for smoke, others relieved pressure inside the castle walls, and some may simply have been the result of structural necessities. No one is entirely certain why each opening existed. Medieval structures rarely left neat explanations behind. You keep walking and reach a section where worn stones create a slight hollow underfoot. The air here feels more stagnant, warmer, even. You crouch down and pass your hand lightly above the surface. In this particular spot, heat from the lower floors seems to seep upward. Kitchens often sat beneath central corridors, and the warmth rising through the stone could create comfortable patches exactly like this one. Imagine a castle resident pausing here in the dead of winter, lingering for a moment before continuing on their errands. A strange detail appears in some written observations from travelers who visited fortified manors centuries ago. They sometimes commented on sudden bursts of warm air that seemed to appear without warning. Some believed these were signs of spirits. Others thought them miracles. But the more practical explanation lies in the castle layout itself, where narrow shafts or disguised gaps allowed heat to drift unpredictably. You step forward again, and the corridor makes another turn, this time opening into a wider gallery. You feel the air settle, not warm, exactly, but calmer, less eager to nip at your skin. You study the tall arches. Their curves seem to guide wind upward rather than through the walkway. It is easy to imagine how the architect, intentionally or not, shaped this place to tame the winter drafts. A few steps farther, the corridor narrows once more, and the cold becomes sharp enough that you instinctively hold your breath. Breath escapes your mouth in a faint, ghostly cloud. You picture a knight walking this very stretch, wrapped in layers, grumbling as the wind slapped him awake. Maybe he carried a small lantern whose flame trembled wildly. Maybe he muttered a quiet curse at the castle for always biting when least expected. You reach a point where two corridors intersect like the branches of a tree. The meeting point feels surprisingly neutral in temperature. Not cold, not warm, almost indifferent. You imagine how people use such crossroads as places to pause, shake out their cloaks, exchange a quick word, and brace themselves before heading into the next drafty tunnel. Your steps echo softly as you move on, noticing how the acoustics change with the shape of the passage. In narrow corridors, sound sharpens. In wide ones, it softens. Everything is connected to airflow. You sense how heat could sometimes pool in strange corners or get whisked away unexpectedly. Medieval residents knew these quirks intimately. They learned the warm routes and the cold ones, the shortcuts that promised a few seconds of comfort, and the hallways that punished anyone who used them after sunset. A few last gusts cling to your cloak as you make your way toward a stout wooden door. Beyond this door lies another chapter in the story of warmth, another way knights outwitted the winter, gripping their stone fortress. You take one final breath of the cold corridor air and push the door open, stepping into the next lesson, hidden inside these ancient walls. You step through the heavy wooden door and immediately notice the temperature shift again. The air here settles differently. It presses lightly against your cheeks with a cool steadiness, not quite the biting cold of the open corridors. A faint glow filters through a row of narrow windows lining the outer wall, and as you walk closer, you feel the unmistakable breath of winter slipping through tiny cracks and seams. Suddenly, you understand why windows, more than almost anything else in a medieval castle, demanded constant attention during the coldest months. The windows themselves are slender vertical slits, some no wider than your palm. They look harmless at first, almost elegant in their simplicity. But as you approach, the wind squeezes through the gaps with a sly confidence, brushing your skin like a whispered warning. A steady trickle of cold continues to seep in, even when the shutters are closed. You place your hand near one opening and feel the sharp draft threading through, as though the castle's walls are quietly exhaling winter into the room. Managing these windows was practically an art form. A well-known detail from surviving castle household accounts notes that maintaining shutters, coverings, and seals around windows became a seasonal task as essential as preparing firewood. When winter set in, Residents stuffed every crack with wool, moss, straw, or fabric scraps. Anything that could soften the draft found a purpose. You lean closer and examine the shutter. It is thick, made of sturdy oak, reinforced with iron hinges. When you push it slightly, it creaks under your touch, releasing a heavier blast of cold from outside. You close it quickly and pull the wooden bar into place. Even secured tightly, the shutter cannot completely block the wind. Medieval builders were masters of defense, not insulation. The result is a window that keeps arrows out, but lets the chill slip through like a ghost. You run your fingertips along the frame and feel a strip of old cloth stuffed into the seam. You tug gently, and it crumbles in your hand, dry and brittle from age. Residents used anything available to fill these tiny gaps. Linen rags, old woolen scraps, bits of felt, even tufts of animal fur. The goal was always the same: stop the cold from barging in uninvited. Over another window, a thick piece of fabric hangs like a curtain, its edges weighted with small stones sewn into the hem. This simple barrier makes a surprising difference. The fabric traps a thin layer of air between the window and the room, softening the draft and dimming the harshness of winter light. You lift the curtain briefly, feel the cold strike your hand instantly, and let it fall again. Some windows, especially in wealthier castles, used thin panes made from polished horn or oiled parchment. You walk toward one such window now. The pane glows softly where the light hits it, turning the space into a gentle, diffused radiance. You press your palm against the horn. It feels cool and slightly uneven. A fragment of historical commentary survives from the period, describing how these translucent windows were prized for blocking wind while still letting light inside. They were fragile, expensive, and nowhere near as clear as glass, but in winter they were worth every coin. A curious anecdote from medieval household guides mentions that during harsh storms, some residents smeared animal fat along the edges of shutters and window frames. The grease helped block wind and repel moisture. It is a strange detail, the kind easily forgotten in grand stories about knights and battles, yet it reveals how inventive people could be when struggling against the cold. You can almost imagine a servant leaning over a window like this one, hands sticky with tallow, muttering quietly about the endless winter. You step back to the center of the room and look around. The walls are lined with tapestries that flutter gently with each draft. They are not just decoration, they serve as insulation, absorbing cold air before it settles in the room. You brush your hand across one. The woolen texture feels thick, almost heavy, designed to soften the stone's unforgiving nature. As you listen to the faint movement of the tapestry, you notice how the castle breathes. A soft hiss of wind slips through one window. A muted stir of fabric responds. The cycle continues endlessly. Medieval residents lived with this rhythm every day. They could muffle the drafts, redirect them, or soften them, but they could never truly escape them. You walk along the wall, pausing at each window to experience the difference in air movement. Some send out a thin, sharp whisper of cold. Others press only a faint coolness against your skin. Each window has its own personality, shaped by its position, the quality of its shutters, and the skill of the craftspeople who built it. A theory occasionally mentioned in architectural studies suggests that some windows were deliberately placed at angles to deflect wind upward or downward, reducing drafts where people sat or slept. Whether intentional or simply born of structural necessity is uncertain, but standing here, you can feel the possibility. One window blows cold directly onto your shoulder, while another guides its draft harmlessly toward the ceiling. You step toward a corner where the light is softer and the air feels warmer. This is where a knight might have sat during winter, positioning himself as far from the windows as possible, without losing the illumination they provided. Perhaps he sharpened his blade here or mended his gear, glancing occasionally toward the shuttered openings as though expecting the cold itself to intrude. You imagine evenings in this room. Candles burn low along the walls. Shadows dance across the floor. The wind outside scratches faintly at the shutters. People sit on benches wrapped in cloaks, chatting softly, glancing now and then toward the windows when the wind howls louder. Someone might rise to press more cloth into a crack or adjust a curtain. These small actions fill the night with a quiet sense of resilience. A small chest near the wall catches your attention. You lift the lid to find bundles of cloth neatly folded inside. Winter window coverings. The fabric smells faintly of herbs, perhaps lavender or thyme. Some households stored scented cloths for this purpose, to counter the musty smell that accumulated behind shutters. You lift one piece, feeling its weight and warmth. It was probably hung over the windows on stormy nights to create thicker protection against the unforgiving wind. You let the cloth fall back into the chest and close the lid gently. The room feels calm, softened by the muted light filtering through the horn panes. The draft remains, persistent but manageable. In a castle like this, managing airflow was not about defeating the cold. It was about negotiating with it, finding balance, accepting that winter had a voice and a presence inside the walls. As you move toward the far door, the last window sends one more breath of chill across your cheek. It is a reminder that no amount of cloth or herbs or clever placement could fully silence the winter. But medieval nights did not need perfection. They needed only enough warmth to survive the night. You step through the doorway, leaving the windows behind, ready to see how the castle walls offered warmth in ways that were both practical and unexpectedly beautiful. You step into a wider chamber where the air shifts again, becoming softer, dimmer, and strangely welcoming. At first, you cannot tell what causes the change. The room is still made of stone, still cold beneath your boots, still shaped by the same relentless winter pressing outside. But then you see them. The walls are not bare here. Instead, they are dressed in long, sweeping tapestries and thick woven carpets hung like blankets against the stone. At once, the cold feels less aggressive, as though the room has shrugged into a warm cloak of its own. You move closer to one tapestry and let your fingers brush the surface. The wool feels slightly coarse, tightly woven, dense enough that you imagine it could stop a chill mid-stride. Tapestries like these were more than decoration. They were insulation. A well-known observation from medieval household inventories reveals that wealthy families invested heavily in wall hangings, not just to display stories or heraldic colours, but to tame the icy breath of their castle walls. A bare stone chamber could suck warmth straight from your body. Cover that stone with thick fabric, and suddenly the cold has to work much harder to reach you. You step back to look at the tapestry more fully. It shows a scene of hunters chasing a stag through a stylized forest, but in the flickering light, the colors glow softly, creating the illusion of movement. The fabric sways just the faintest bit as a draft moves behind it, rustling like leaves. You realize that the tapestry hides not only the stone, but also the sound of wind slipping through cracks. It transforms the harsh, echoing acoustics of the castle into something gentler, quieter. In a few places, you notice the edges of tapestries weighted with stitched stones or beads. This small but clever addition kept the fabric hanging smoothly against the wall, so cold air could not billow behind it. You reach out and feel the faint heaviness along the lower hem, practicality and artistry woven together in one object. As you turn toward another wall, you notice something more unusual, a tapestry layered on top of another, creating a double barrier. Some accounts from castle estates note that on particularly brutal winters, residents hung extra lengths of cloth over their favorite tapestries, reinforcing warmth the way someone today might add an extra blanket to a bed. You lift a corner of the top layer and feel the thickness. Cloth against cloth, fibers pressing close. The cold has very little opportunity to slip through here. You walk along the wall, moving from tapestry to tapestry, and your hand eventually grazes a different texture. A carpet. A rich, thick floor carpet hung vertically, like a second wall. Imported carpets, when they existed in castles, were rare and expensive, but they served a remarkable purpose. They were even better insulators than ordinary tapestries. You press your palm against it and feel how it muffles sound and warmth alike. A deep, soft stillness settles around you. A curious detail sometimes mentioned in merchant accounts catches your imagination. Some carpets and tapestry fabrics were deliberately woven with thicker yarn along their outer edges to provide additional protection from drafts. These reinforced borders acted like a seal against the cold, holding the fabric close to the stone. You move toward a corner where a woven piece hangs from a wooden rod. The image shows a knight kneeling before a lady in a garden. But what captures your attention is not the scene but the way the bottom of the tapestry pools in a small basket of rushes. You lift the edge carefully and see how the rushes help trap air beneath the cloth. This combination of materials creates a pocket of warmth, like a tiny climate zone pressed against the wall. Pausing near the middle of the room, you close your eyes and listen. The heavy textiles hush the chamber. Every sound is cushioned. It feels almost safe, warmer, quieter, calmer. This effect was treasured in castles. When tapestries lined the walls, rooms felt more private. Conversations stayed gentle. Footsteps softened. Cold air slowed down, forced to navigate layers of woven wool instead of rushing against naked stone. You imagine a knight stepping into this room on a frigid evening, turning his back to a wall hanging. The tapestry would warm slightly from his body heat, and in return, it would shield him from the worst of the winter chill. Perhaps he would lean against it while reading a piece of correspondence by candlelight. Perhaps he would rest his head against the fabric, enjoying its softness after a long day in armor. Physically, the room becomes a cocoon. Emotionally, it becomes a sanctuary. One tapestry near the far wall catches your attention for a different reason. Its design looks worn. The colors faded. The edges frayed. But when you lift it slightly, you discover a layer of straw-packed cloth hidden behind it. This simple technique appears in a few rare references from domestic management notes, layering cloth over bundles of straw to create a surprisingly effective insulating panel. It was not common, but it existed. A quiet innovation born from necessity. You let the tapestry fall back into place, and the rustle echoes softly in the warmened air. You take a few steps farther, noticing how every hanging piece shifts ever so slightly with your movement. They respond to you like sleepy living things, stirring as you pass. You imagine them absorbing the warmth of candles, the warmth of bodies, the warmth of food, storing it all in their fibers throughout the night. The last tapestry in the room bears a pattern of looping vines and mythical creatures. Your fingertips trace the embroidery, feeling the raised threads, the meticulous craftsmanship. This fabric holds more than warmth. It holds pride, status, identity. People use tapestries to tell stories about themselves, to honor their lineage, to create beauty in a place dominated by stone and winter. You step back, letting the weight of the moment linger. The room feels transformed by these fabrics. Softer, safer, more human. You imagine knights gathering here during bitter nights, leaning close to the walls so their backs could absorb the warmth hidden behind the cloth. You picture them playing dice, whispering gossip, polishing swords, or simply sitting in silence, grateful for the layers that turned cold stone into something resembling comfort. When you finally walk toward the next doorway, the tapestries sway gently in your wake, as if bidding you farewell. You leave the cozy hush behind and feel the cold creeping toward you again, reminding you that warmth in a medieval castle was always temporary, always earned, always cherished. You step through the door, ready to discover the next trick the past used to tame the winter that pressed so relentlessly against these ancient walls. You step through the doorway and into a smaller chamber, where the air feels different again, softer at the edges and warmer in scattered pockets, almost as if the very stones here remember sleep. This is a sleeping room, though not the luxurious kind reserved for lords. It is simpler, humbler, and shaped entirely by the needs of winter. You walk slowly across the floor, noticing how the temperature shifts around you. In one corner it feels crisp enough to tighten your shoulders, yet in another it holds a faint, lingering warmth that makes you pause. The bedding draws your attention first. Low wooden frames sit close to the ground, each topped with stuffed mattresses that look uneven but inviting in a rugged, practical way. You move closer and press your hand gently into one of them. It gives beneath your weight, rustling softly with the unmistakable whisper of straw. Medieval bedding almost always began with straw. It was abundant, cheap, and surprisingly efficient at trapping heat. When mixed with dried leaves or herbs, it created a sleeping surface that warmed quickly under the human body. You lift the corner of a mattress and find layers inside. Straw, then wool, then more straw. Some household notes from the period describe families refreshing their bedding twice a year, adding sprigs of herbs not just for scent, but also to discourage insects. You imagine climbing into a bed that smells faintly of thyme or lavender on a frozen night, the scent mingling with the cool air in a way that feels soothing, almost protective. Above the mattress lies a wool blanket heavy enough to press gently against your chest. You run your fingers along its surface. The wool feels thick, slightly scratchy, dependable. You picture a knight pulling it up to his chin, grateful for its weight. In winter, a blanket was more than fabric. It was a shield, a barrier, a nightly companion in the battle against cold that seeped relentlessly through stone walls. Draped across one of the beds is a fur covering, the kind often made from sheepskin or goat hide. The fur feels soft as you brush your fingertips through it, thick enough to cradle heat for hours. Some crafted blankets were lined with fur on one side and wool on the other, creating a double layer of insulation. These combinations were treasured in winter. You imagine sliding beneath one, the cold air retreating instantly as the fur wraps around you like a protective animal. Your gaze drifts toward a small stone basin near the wall. Inside it sits a pile of flat, rounded stones, each the size of your palm. These would have been heated earlier in the hearth, then carried here wrapped in cloth to warm the bedding. You pick one up. Though cold now, you can imagine the slow release of heat that would have radiated through wool and fur. A simple technique, yet remarkably effective. Some winter nights likely began with a ritual of arranging these heated stones beneath blankets before sleep. A faint indentation in the mattress nearest the wall catches your attention. Someone must have curled there night after night, shaping the straw to their body. You sit gently on the edge and feel how the bedding shifts. Within a minute, a soft warmth forms where you rest. Straw responds quickly to human heat. It creates tiny air pockets beneath your weight, holding warmth close instead of letting it escape into the stone. You glance up and notice the room has been arranged with intention. The beds sit away from the windows, where drafts would strike hardest. They cluster near the interior wall, where warmth from neighboring rooms can seep gently through the stone. The shutters are tightly sealed, and thick fabric curtains hang over them. Someone cared about keeping this space warm, even if only modestly. Near one bed lies a thick linen sheet, folded neatly. Some residents layered linen beneath wool to prevent the scratchiness from irritating their skin. The linen absorbed moisture, while the wool trapped warmth. You brush your hand across the fabric. It is smoother, cooler, more refined. In a cold castle, comfort often came from tiny details like this. A small clay pot sits in the corner, still sooty from charcoal. These little pots acted like portable, personal heaters. When filled with embers and covered with perforated lids, they could be placed near the foot of a bed to keep the cold at bay. You kneel beside it and imagine the faint glow of red coals pulsing like a sleeper's heartbeat, warming the space around tired feet. A quiet detail from medieval writings suggests that some people even warmed their bedding by placing a warmed brick or iron plate wrapped in cloth under the covers. The heat spread slowly, enough to take the edge off the cold before climbing in. You imagine slipping between the blankets after such preparation, the cold shocking your skin only briefly before melting away. You rise and walk around the room, feeling how the space itself holds warmth differently than the corridors. The low ceiling captures heat from breath and bodies. The walls, though cold to the touch, radiate less chill here than elsewhere. This room has lived through many winters. Its stones have absorbed countless nights of quiet breathing, low laughter, whispered conversations, and sleepy shifting beneath soft blankets. You imagine the nightly routine. A knight enters, rubbing his hands together after hours in the cold hallways. He checks the shutters, pulls the curtain tighter, shakes out his bedding, places heated stones carefully, and settles down. The sound of his cloak falling onto a wooden peg breaks the stillness. The mattress rustles as he lies down. A deep breath fills the room, then slowly drifts out in a foggy cloud. Another figure slips in, then another. Quiet exchanges float in the warm half-dark. Someone laughs softly at a comment about cold feet. Someone tucks the blanket up to their chin. Someone rolls over with a sigh. The room warms gradually, breath by breath, body by body, weaving the night into a cocoon that defies the winter, clawing at the walls outside. You pause a final moment beside one of the beds, letting your fingertips rest lightly on the wool. You can almost feel the memory of warmth still clinging to it. Then you step back, taking one last slow breath of the soft, cozy air, before turning toward the door. As you step into the corridor, the cold greets you immediately, eager to erase the comfort you just experienced. Still, you tuck the memory of that warmth close as you move forward, ready to discover yet another way medieval people kept the cold from stealing their sleep. You return to the corridor, your footsteps echoing softly as the cold folds around you again. But this time, something new glints faintly in the dim light. You step closer and find a niche carved into the wall, holding a small metal object the size of your hand. It is round, slightly dented, and fitted with a tiny hinged lid. When you ease it open, you see the soot-dark interior where glowing coals would once have nestled. You are holding a medieval hand warmer. It feels heavier than you expect, solid and purposeful. You imagine slipping a few embers inside, closing the lid, and feeling the gentle heat radiate outward through the metal. A tool like this could keep fingers flexible during patrols, prevent numbness during long vigils, or simply offer comfort as someone walked from one freezing part of the castle to another. Practical, portable warmth. You press your palms around it and imagine how welcome that heat would feel on a night when the cold turned your breath into frost. You set the warmer down gently and move farther along the wall, where several small items sit arranged in a row. A clay brazier, small enough to carry. A perforated iron box that looks like a miniature stove. A metal pan with a long handle, shaped to hold coals and slide beneath clothing or bedding. These were the quiet companions of winter, the little inventions that helped medieval people push back against the cold with creativity rather than sheer endurance. One familiar detail from daily castle life mentions that these warmers were often heated in the kitchen. Servants would fill them with fresh coals at dusk, then distribute them through the castle, like tiny suns being carried room to room. You imagine a servant hurrying down a hallway, arms full of warmers wrapped in cloth to protect their hands, each one radiating comfort. They would leave one inside a knight's chamber, another in the guardroom, another near a writing desk, where someone might be drafting letters with stiff, cold fingers. You lift another device, this one shaped like a shallow bowl with small holes punched into the top. Its handle is long and slightly curved. You recognize it instantly. It is a foot warmer. Someone would slide this beneath the hem of their cloak or under a bench, warming their boots while they sat. You picture a knight perched on a stool, feet resting above the glowing coals, leaning forward with a tired sigh as the warmth seeps through leather and wool. Nearby sits a curious item, a small, round stone polished smooth on one side. You pick it up and feel its cool surface. A few texts from domestic accounts describe heated stones like these being used as personal warm blocks. Unlike metal warmers, stones released heat slowly and evenly. You imagine someone warming this stone in the fireplace, wrapping it in a bit of cloth, and tucking it into their cloak as they ventured into the cold corridors. You walk deeper into the room and find a wooden chest filled with folded pieces of thick felt. These were not clothing, but wrappers. Warmers were often wrapped in felt to prevent burns and to prolong the release of heat. The material absorbed warmth, holding it close like a patient guardian. You lift one piece and feel its softness. It smells faintly of smoke, maybe even herbs from past winters. A memory from historical descriptions flickers through your mind. Some households added fragrant herbs to the felt wrappers, believing the warm, herb-scented air helped clear the chest during cold months. The idea blends practicality with superstition, a reminder that medieval warmth often involved both science and belief intertwined. You set the felt aside and move toward a narrow window where a small basket sits. Inside it are tiny, rounded stones no bigger than eggs. These stones were kept near fires to warm hands during long indoor tasks. A person could rotate through several stones, using one until it cooled, then replacing it with a fresh one from the basket. You lift one stone and imagine a scribe holding it between writing lines, willing warmth into stiff knuckles. As you continue, you find a worn leather pouch hanging from a hook. When you open it, you see a small hand warmer inside, shaped like a metal disc, with a simple, stamped pattern. You imagine a knight carrying such a pouch on a journey, using the warmer during cold rides or overnight stays in drafty shelters. These small devices made winter travel possible. They were essential, not optional. A little further, you spot a wooden frame with a metal cylinder resting inside it. This contraption was used to heat boots before wearing them. Someone would place a heated iron rod inside the cylinder, then slide boots over it. The warmth would soften the leather, making it easier to wear and far more comfortable. You picture a knight leaning against a table, watching steam rise from his boots while rubbing his hands together near a brazier. A faint scent of charcoal lingers in the air as you walk. You imagine guards standing in the tower above, each one holding a hand warmer to keep frostbite at bay during long night watches. These devices were essential for those stationed on battlements. No matter how many layers you wore, the wind on exposed towers could steal heat from your body in minutes. A glowing warmer in your hands was often the difference between steady vigilance and dangerous numbness. You pause near a low stone shelf and sit on its edge. You lift another warmer, feeling its shape settle naturally into your grip. You imagine the rhythmic comfort of holding it during long winter nights, feeling the pulse of heat in your palms. There is something almost meditative about it, a little ritual of warmth and waiting. Some accounts from castle life mention that warmers were commonly shared among small groups, while stories of knights sharing battle glory fill legends. Here, you imagine quieter scenes. 3 or 4 people around a low brazier, passing a hand warmer from one person to the next, each holding it briefly while laughing about something mundane. Warmth brings people together. Even now, you can feel that truth settling gently around you. You set the warmer back in its place and rise. The air is cold again, but your hands still hold the memory of imagined heat. Personal warmers were small miracles in a winter world built of stone and wind. They made footsteps lighter, fingers faster, nights bearable. As you turn toward the next doorway, you carry that sense of discreet comfort with you, ready to see how medieval people used even water and steam to fight the cold lurking beyond the walls. You turn the corner and descend a short flight of steps, the air growing cooler as you move away from the hand warmers and heated stones. The stairwell curves, guiding you toward a space you would not expect in a medieval castle, a place of steam, water, and quiet ritual. When you step into the next chamber, a gentle haze hangs in the air like a drifting thought. The room smells faintly of damp wood, crushed herbs, and warm stone. Your skin instantly recognizes the promise lingering here. Even in a frozen fortress, people found ways to bathe, soothe their bodies, and warm their spirits. The chamber is not elaborate. It is nothing like the marble bathhouses of ancient Rome or the polished spas of the modern world, but it carries the same intention. Along one wall sits a large wooden tub, its planks swollen slightly from repeated use. Nearby, buckets of water rest on a low bench, some cool, others warm enough that thin tendrils of steam rise from them. You step closer. The stone floor beneath your boots radiates a surprising warmth. Someone placed heated stones here earlier, pushing back the cold that seeped upward from the earth. A well-known observation from medieval household records notes that bathwater was often heated in the kitchen or over a small hearth, then carried to the bath chamber in dozens of careful trips. You picture servants hauling steaming buckets through drafty corridors, muttering under their breath as they tried not to spill a precious drop. Bathing was never effortless, but people did it anyway, especially in winter, when heat itself was a form of comfort. You kneel beside the tub and dip your hand into the warm water. It is not hot, but pleasantly mild, the kind of warmth that settles into your skin one breath at a time. Medieval baths were often lukewarm, heated just enough to soothe cold muscles and chase away the stiffness that winter hammered into every joint. Hanging from a wooden peg near the tub is a bundle of dried herbs tied with twine, rosemary, mint, maybe chamomile. You lift it to your nose. The scent rises softly, familiar and calming. Some bathers steeped these herbs in the water, believing the steam could clear congested lungs or ease aches. Others simply enjoyed the fragrance. You imagine a knight sinking into this tub after days spent in the freezing air, letting the warmth soak into bruised shoulders and tired legs. In another corner, a smaller basin rests beside a stack of cloths. This area was used for quick washes when a full bath was too much trouble. You touch one of the cloths. It feels rough, woven from simple linen. Someone would have dipped it into warm water, squeezed it out, and scrubbed the grime of winter from their hands and face. Not luxurious, but refreshing, especially after long hours in cold corridors. A curious note from medieval writings describes how some households created makeshift steam baths by pouring hot water onto heated stones. You glance toward the far side of the room and see a cluster of smooth river stones arranged in a shallow pit. If someone heated these stones in the fire and splashed water over them, the room would fill with a wave of warm vapor. You run your fingers over one stone, imagining its surface hissing as water hits it. The steam would wrap around your body like a soft blanket, loosening the tightness winter forced into every muscle. You stand and walk to a shelf where pottery jars sit in a neat row. Inside them are salves made from animal fat, mixed with herbs or oils. These ointments were used after bathing to soften the skin, protect against windburn, or soothe cracked knuckles. You lift one jar and notice its faint fragrance, mild and earthy. You imagine someone warming the salve between their hands before rubbing it into their skin, feeling comfort sink into places the cold had worn thin. Not far from the jars sits a wooden ladle. You pick it up and feel its smooth curve. This would have been used to pour water over shoulders or hair. You imagine a squire helping a knight, ladling warm water in slow, steady arcs, listening to the quiet sigh that escapes from someone finally feeling human again after hours in biting cold. A wide wooden bench rests against the wall. Some castles used these benches as simple cooling places after bathing, though in winter they were often covered with furs or blankets. You sit on one and notice how warm the air feels compared to the corridors. Your breath does not fog here. The faint steam clings to your skin, softening the harsh edges of the castle's winter. A thought from historical commentary floats through your mind. People sometimes treated bathing as both a necessity and a social ritual. You picture 2 or 3 women sharing a bath, gossiping quietly, or knights loosening their armor and trading jokes before washing away the mud of training. Bathing did not happen daily, but when it did, the warmth created a welcome pause in the relentless rhythm of cold. You move to a small alcove where a wooden bucket sits beneath a narrow pipe set into the wall. This crude setup sometimes channeled water from upper cisterns or collected rainwater. In winter, it must have frozen often. You touch the rim of the bucket and imagine the frustration of waiting for water to thaw. Even so, people made do. Some heated snow directly, melting it over the fire when nothing else was available. A faint memory from one medieval chronicle mentions that some soldiers believed a warm bath could sharpen the mind before battle, while others worried it weakened the body by relaxing it too much. Preferences varied widely. Even those who avoided full baths in winter still washed their hands and feet with warm water whenever possible. The shock of cold water would have been unbearable in weather like this. You step closer to the tub again and imagine lowering yourself into it. The initial warmth spreads across your skin, makes your muscles unclench, makes your bones feel almost weightless. Winter fades for a moment, replaced by the soft sound of rippling water. You can almost hear someone humming quietly, the notes muffled by steam and wooden walls. Someone might knock on the door, bringing a freshly warmed stone to place beneath the tub. Another might bring extra buckets of warm water to top it up. Bathing was rarely a solitary act. It was part of castle life, shared, coordinated, appreciated by many. As you rise and head toward the door, the steam thins, and the air shifts back toward the familiar chill of the corridors. But your skin still carries a ghost of the warmth, the lingering memory of water and herbs and gentle heat. You take a final breath of moist air before stepping out of the chamber. The cold greets you instantly, sharp and unchanged, yet you feel steadier, warmed from within by the brief escape. And as you walk forward, you sense another kind of warmth ahead, coming not from water or fire, but from the bustling heart of the castle itself. You follow the corridor upward, guided by the faint scent of smoke and something richer, something savory. The air grows warmer with every step, not in gentle pulses but in strong, confident waves that make your cheeks flush. You know before you even see the doorway that you are approaching one of the warmest places in the entire castle. When you step inside, the heat hits you like a deep, welcoming embrace. You are in the kitchen, the great furnace of medieval life, the place where winter loosened its grip, if only for a while. The kitchen is a world of its own. Fire glows from 2 enormous hearths along opposite walls, their flames licking high into blackened chimneys. Cauldrons hang from iron hooks. Pots simmer. Bread rises in clay ovens. Wooden tables are scattered with bunches of herbs, cleavers, jugs of ale, and baskets of root vegetables. The air feels thick and warm, flavored with the scent of onions, pepper, wood smoke, and something roasting slowly over the fire. You take a step farther into the room, and the heat settles around your shoulders, sinking into your bones so deeply that you feel lighter. It is no wonder the kitchen was the beating heart of the castle during winter. Workers bustled here from dawn until long after dusk, and the constant fires made the space glow like a living organism. You move closer to the main hearth, where a massive pan hangs over a steady flame. The wood beneath it crackles and snaps, sending sparks up the chimney. A detail found in several castle studies explains that kitchens were purposely built with high ceilings to let smoke rise quickly. Even so, a faint haze floats above you, tinged with the smell of roasted meat. You blink as warmth curls across your eyelids. Beside the hearth stands a wooden table stained from years of chopping. You run your fingertips along its surface and imagine a cook standing here, sleeves rolled up, hands moving swiftly from knife to pot to bowl. Kitchens needed constant attention, not only to feed the entire household but also to keep fires burning. Flames had to be coaxed and controlled, ash swept away, coals stoked until they glowed like tiny suns. You notice a row of iron pans resting near the fire, their sides warm to the touch. A comment sometimes made in period manuscripts describes how workers would place kitchen tools near the hearth not only to heat food faster but also to keep their hands warm during long shifts. You imagine a young kitchen assistant rubbing chilled fingers along the handle of a warm pan before returning to their tasks with renewed energy. A large cauldron bubbles gently in the corner, The liquid inside simmers so steadily that you feel its warmth even from several steps away. You lift the lid slightly and watch steam swirl upward, carrying with it the scent of broth and herbs. In winter, soups and stews simmered all day. The heat rising from the pot warmed not just bodies but the air itself, filling the room with a gentle fog that softened every sound. You turn and see a stone shelf holding dozens of flat-heated stones. These stones were used to regulate oven temperatures, but they also served a quieter purpose. Workers often slipped warm stones into their boots before heading into colder parts of the castle. A simple trick, but one that made all the difference when the wind outside howled like a restless animal circling the walls. Moving toward a side alcove, you spot a smaller hearth used for baking. You open the door of its clay oven and feel a burst of hot air against your face. The bread inside has risen into golden mounds. You inhale deeply, letting the scent wash over you. Bread was not just food, it was insulation from despair. A loaf fresh from the oven could warm hands and spirits in equal measure. On the far side of the kitchen, a row of hooks displays cured meats hanging from the ceiling. You imagine smoke drifting upward to season and preserve them. During winter, this part of the kitchen played a vital role. Meat needed protection from rot, and the warmth of the kitchen kept it pliable. Someone would slice a piece, carry it to the main table, and stir it into the evening pot. Simple food, but packed with the energy needed to survive cold nights. You walk along the room's perimeter and notice a curious detail: several small vents carved into the walls. These vents help release excess smoke, but their placement also allowed warm air to drift gently into adjacent chambers. Kitchen warmth was never wasted. It seeped through cracks, traveled up stairwells, and drifted beneath doors, creating hidden pockets of comfort throughout the castle. You imagine winter evenings here. The kitchen hums with activity, each worker sweating, even as snow falls outside. Someone laughs while stirring a pot. Someone else wipes flour from their arms. A cook leans back for a moment, fanning their face with a cloth, enjoying the rare luxury of warmth in a world built of cold stone. Near a bench, you notice a wool-lined cloak hanging neatly on a peg. The idea behind this is simple. If a worker had to step outside briefly, they grabbed the cloak to shield themselves from the cold and returned it to the peg when they came back in. The cloak remains warm long after its wearer hangs it back up. You touch the fabric and feel the faint heat trapped inside. It is like finding a memory of comfort left behind by someone who was here only moments ago. Before leaving, you glance once more at the glowing hearth. You feel the warmth reach toward you, almost reluctant to let you go. The kitchen is more than a workspace. It is a sanctuary, a place where heat conquers cold without struggle, where winter is reduced to a distant nuisance. It is also a reminder that warmth in a castle was rarely accidental. It was built, cultivated, and guarded by the people who kept these fires alive day after day. As you step toward the door, the heat clings to your skin like a soft cloak, but once you cross the threshold, the cold corridor waits, eager to reclaim you. Still, you carry the kitchen's warmth with you as you move deeper into the castle, toward the curious warmth that comes from creatures who share the walls with you. You leave the kitchen's glow behind and follow a downward passageway, the air cooling step by step until you can see your breath again. The walls grow darker, the ceiling lower. A faint, earthy smell begins to rise from the stone floor, a mixture of hay, soil, and something warm and unmistakably alive. You follow it deeper, and soon a chorus of soft rustles, hoof scrapes, and muffled snorts reaches your ears. When you step into the next chamber, the warmth embraces you in a way no fire or brazier ever could. You have entered the stables. At first, the space seems colder than the kitchen but warmer than the corridors. It has a pulse, an underlying heat generated not by flames but by the bodies of dozens of animals. Horses shift in their stalls, steaming gently in the cool air. Goats nibble lazily at straw. Chickens rustle and fluff their feathers in the corner. Even a few dogs lie curled on burlap sacks near the wall. The space hums quietly with warmth as steady as a living hearth. You take a step forward and feel the temperature rising from the gathered breath and body heat. Animals radiate warmth constantly, and in a stone castle that is otherwise merciless in winter, this chamber becomes a surprising refuge. A commonly noted observation from medieval estate management records mentions that lower floors of castles, especially those near the stables, often felt warmer than rooms directly above them because heat drifted upward through the stone. You rest your hand on the wooden stall of a horse. The wood feels warm from the animal's presence. The horse turns its head toward you, its breath rolling out in a soft cloud. You can almost imagine a knight standing here on a bitter morning, leaning into his horse's neck for a moment of shared warmth before saddling up. The animal would huff, shake its mane, and press close in return, giving a small comfort that no blanket could match. In the corner, you notice piles of fresh straw. You kneel and run your fingers through it. Straw is one of the most efficient natural insulators. It traps air, retains heat, and stays soft under pressure. People used it not only for bedding but also to line the floors of colder rooms. Here, layered thickly, it creates a warm cushion beneath the animals and softens the constant chill of the stone. A detail from medieval accounts lingers in your mind. Some castle residents would spend short breaks in the stables during winter simply to warm up, not to work, not to ride, but to lean against the stalls or sit near the goats, soaking up animal heat like a sleepy cat on a sunny windowsill. There is something deeply human about that image. People finding warmth in the breath of their own animals when the fires elsewhere could not reach them. You walk between the stalls, noticing how each creature seems to create its own pocket of warmth. A horse shifts its weight, hooves thudding softly. A goat bleats, then settles again. A dog opens one eye, yawns, and curls tighter into its ball of fur. You find yourself smiling at the simple comfort of it all. The stable walls are thick, reinforced by supporting beams and stacked stone. Even though the air is cool, the room retains heat far better than the exposed corridors above. You place your hand on the stone nearest the largest stall and feel the faint warmth seeping through. That heat is not enough to keep the castle mild, but it makes a difference. Some researchers studying castle remains have pointed out that a surprising number of living chambers were placed above or beside stables for this very reason. You walk toward the far side of the room, where a trough filled with warm mash sits steaming gently. Someone recently prepared it. Hot feed in winter was important not just for animal comfort, but for the warmth it added to the space. You look around and imagine a squire sweeping the floor, tossing fresh straw, and feeding the horses. These chores warmed the worker as much as the animals, turning physical movement into its own kind of winter survival strategy. Near the back corner, you find a narrow stairway leading up to a loft filled with stored hay. You climb halfway up and pause. The air grows warmer as you ascend, rising from the animals below. The loft itself smells sweet and earthy, the scent wrapping you gently. Hay absorbs and releases heat slowly, almost like a primitive thermal blanket. Spending even a few minutes up here would soften the cold that clung to your bones elsewhere in the castle. You imagine a night squire slipping up to the hayloft for a moment's rest, burrowing into the softness, letting the warmth soak into his hands. Maybe he would drift into a brief nap, hidden from the icy drafts that prowled the hallways above. Descending again, you return to the steady glow of warmth below. A horse nudges your shoulder, its breath warm enough to make your skin tingle. You press your hand lightly against its neck. The fur and skin feel like gentle heat radiating outward. In another corner, a pair of dogs sleep curled together, their shared warmth rising like a soft halo. Something from a medieval traveler's journal crosses your thoughts now. It described how, during harsh winters, people sometimes slept near their animals when temperatures dropped too low in the living quarters, not out of desperation alone, but because the animal's presence created a comforting rhythm of sound and heat that wrapped the space like a blanket. You pause and let that thought settle. There is something tender in the idea of warmth shared between species during the harshest months. You take a slow step back, breathing in the earthy air. The warmth is not intense but steady. It holds you like a quiet friend. In a castle filled with drafts, icy windows, and cold stone, this room offers a different kind of comfort. Not crafted by human hands, not built with stone and wood, but alive and generous. When you finally turn toward the doorway, the cold waits outside, eager as ever, but you carry the stable's warmth with you now, a warmth that smells of hay and soft breath, a warmth born from the living heartbeat of the castle itself. You step into the corridor, the cold rising again, and prepare to explore how medieval minds tried to tame smoke and heat in ways both clever and imperfect. You climb a narrow flight of stairs, leaving behind the soft animal warmth of the stables. The air grows colder again, thinner somehow, carrying the faint metallic tang of ancient soot. At the top of the steps, you enter a chamber filled with chimneys, vents, angled ductwork, and the faintest scent of old smoke embedded deep within the stones. This is not a room meant for comfort. It is a room meant for problem-solving, a quiet battleground where medieval builders wrestled with one of winter's greatest enemies, the complicated dance between fire and air. You step farther inside, listening to the hush of the space. A few thin trails of smoke drift lazily from an opening overhead, slipping through a narrow vent you almost miss at first glance. The draft here is subtle but persistent. It pulls the air upward, as if the castle is breathing through hidden lungs. You tilt your head, watching the faint threads of smoke disappear into shadow. Medieval heating was never simple. Fireplaces roared with heat, but the smoke they created constantly tested the limits of the castle's design. You walk toward a tall stone chimney column and touch your fingertips lightly against it. It feels cold, but beneath the surface you imagine the faint memory of warmth from fires lit hours ago. The chimney stretches upward like a giant stone throat, swallowing heat, smoke, and stray sparks. One commonly noted observation from studies of surviving castles suggests that medieval masons experimented constantly with airflow. Some chimneys were built wide, others narrow. Some angled abruptly, others rose in long, straight shafts. The results varied wildly. In some rooms, fires burned cleanly, their smoke whisked away as if carried by an invisible hand. In others, the air grew so thick with smoke that residents had to kneel near the floor just to breathe. You take a step back and picture the scene centuries ago. A knight sitting by a hearth, trying to warm himself, coughing lightly as smoke drifted into the room instead of up the chimney. He waves his hand in irritation, muttering about the fickle nature of winter winds. A servant hurries to adjust the vent above the fireplace. Tugging on ropes connected to a wooden flap, the flap shifts with a soft clack, altering the draft. Sometimes it helped, sometimes it made things worse. As you walk deeper into the chamber, you notice a series of narrow vertical slits carved deep into the stone. They rise like ribs along the walls. These are ventilation channels, built to coax smoke toward upper exits. You place your palm near one and feel a gentle pull of air, faint but unmistakable. The movement reminds you that castles relied heavily on natural convection, guiding warm air upward and pushing smoke along hidden pathways. A few steps farther, you encounter a curious archway that narrows drastically at the top. It creates a funnel shape, directing airflow toward a higher opening. Some researchers believe this was one of the earliest attempts to control smoke using pressure differentials. Others think it was just a structural necessity that happened to influence air movement. The truth lies somewhere in the middle, buried in the ingenuity of medieval builders who relied on observation more than theory. You crouch near the base of another chimney shaft. The soot on the stones is thick, black, and crumbly. You brush your fingers lightly along it. The residue tells a quiet story of centuries of fires, kitchens, and roaring hearths. Heat and smoke left their signatures everywhere, painting the castle in shades of winter perseverance. A warm gust rises suddenly from the floor beneath you. You pause, startled at first, then realize what it means. Somewhere below, perhaps in a kitchen or a guardroom, a fire is still burning. The chimney beside you carries its warmth upward, letting it seep through the stone and into the room like a faint exhale. This is why upper floors sometimes felt warmer than expected. Heat traveled through these channels, whether invited or not. You stand and move toward another part of the wall, where a small square opening sits at knee height. It looks unremarkable until you step closer and feel cold air sliding out of it. This was likely an early ventilation vent, designed to draw fresh air into a room where fires burned constantly. You imagine a cook or a blacksmith needing this welcome breeze to avoid suffocating. Yet in winter, that same breeze must have been unwelcome, a reminder that comfort and danger often shared the same doorway. A strange note from medieval building descriptions mentions that some households experimented with hanging damp cloths near vents to filter out smoke particles. You look around and imagine pieces of wet linen draped near these openings, hissing softly as the heat evaporated them. The idea was simple: keep the air breathable without losing too much warmth. Not perfect, but clever. You walk beneath a low beam and find yourself under a cluster of angled ducts that branch like tree limbs overhead. These ducts connected various fireplaces, ovens, and hearths, attempting to guide smoke out of the castle. But such systems were unpredictable. Winds from outside could push smoke back down the chimney. Sudden gusts from open doors could send it swirling into nearby rooms. The castle breathed, yes, but sometimes it coughed. You picture winter gatherings in the great hall, the enormous fireplace roaring, only for a sudden shift in the wind to send a rolling cloud of smoke straight into the room. People cough, Servants rush to adjust shutters. A knight jokes that the fire is testing everyone's loyalty. Someone waves their hands dramatically, trying to clear the air. Even discomfort created moments of laughter and shared frustration. You step closer to a small metal grate near the floor. Behind it lies a horizontal channel, dark and quiet. A few household management notes from the era mention these low channels being used to increase airflow under certain conditions. Some funneled smoke, others funneled heat. Some may have helped dry damp floors. The exact purpose often depended on the individual castle's design, and no two were exactly alike. Rising again, you tilt your head toward the ceiling. A wide shaft opens above you, disappearing into darkness. Smoke once spiraled up through that shaft, twisting like a grey ribbon toward the winter sky. You imagine it rising past wooden beams, drifting into hidden chambers, leaving a faint scent that lingered long after the fire died. A tremor of cold from the corridor slips in as you walk toward the exit. You pause, feeling gratitude for all the unseen thought that went into making even a brutal winter slightly more bearable. The battle between heat and smoke challenged medieval people daily. They responded not with perfection, but with creativity, stubbornness, and the willingness to adapt. Standing at the threshold, you take one last look at the maze of chimneys and vents. Behind you, the castle's quiet breathing continues. A faint plume of warmth rises upward, fading into the shadows. You step into the corridor once more, ready to confront how medieval knights handled cold steel and freezing winds in the next chapter of their winter survival. You head down another dim hallway where the stones feel colder than ever, as if they have stored the memory of winter for 100 generations. The air grows tighter, sharper, and you cannot miss the faint metallic tang drifting toward you. When you turn the corner, the source becomes unmistakable. A wooden rack stretches along the wall, lined with pieces of armor, breastplates, gauntlets, greaves, helmets. Each one gleams faintly in the torchlight, its surface catching firelight in cold flashes. You step closer, and the temperature seems to drop even further. Steel does not forgive the cold. You reach out and touch a gauntlet. The metal is so icy it makes your fingertips recoil. You imagine what it must have felt like for a knight preparing for a patrol on a freezing morning. That first contact with armor would have been a shock, the metal stealing heat from the skin instantly. Yet knights dealt with it day after day, gripping frozen buckles and chilled straps with numb fingers, bracing themselves for the slow, stubborn process of warming the armor with their own body heat. A widely noted detail from studies of medieval equipment explains that armor was almost never worn directly against the skin. Every knight depended on layers beneath the metal, a padded gambeson, linen undergarments, sometimes even extra wool in winter. These layers were essential not only for comfort and protection but for insulation. You pick up a gambeson hanging beside the armor rack. It is thick, quilted, and heavy, its padded layers stiff with the memory of endless wear. It feels surprisingly warm compared to the cold metal beside it. You slip your fingers inside the gambeson and imagine pulling it over your head. The padded cloth muffles the corridor's chill, creating an insulating cocoon around your torso. Knights often relied on the gambeson to soften the initial cold shock of armor. You picture a squire assisting, tugging the garment into place, tugging the sleeves straight, tightening the straps. Preparing armor was teamwork, especially in winter. Near the rack, you see a small brazier filled with faintly glowing coals. The warmth spreads only a little, but enough to make the air shimmer above it. You kneel beside it and feel the heat brush your hands. A few medieval accounts describe squires warming buckles, straps, or even small armor pieces over coals before helping their knight suit up. Not enough to heat the whole plate, but enough to prevent fingers from sticking to freezing metal. You imagine the soft hiss of a warm buckle pressed against cold air, the relief of a knight fastening it without wincing. Beside the brazier sits a clever contraption, a long, curved iron rod attached to a wooden handle. This tool was used to warm the inside of helmets. Someone would heat the rod, slip it carefully inside a helmet for a few seconds, then remove it quickly before the metal grew too hot. The goal was simple: prevent that shocking chill when cold steel touched the forehead or cheeks. You pick up the helmet nearby. The metal feels heavy and utterly frigid. Even with the padding inside, it must have taken courage to place it on your head before the heat from your body slowly tamed it. You move to another part of the room where pieces of chainmail hang like shimmering waterfalls. You run your hand along one hauberk. The rings jingle softly, cool and rhythmic, Chainmail absorbs cold even more thoroughly than plate. The countless tiny rings create endless surface area, allowing winter to nestle into every crevice. A knight slipping into mail after a night in a cold room must have felt it like 1,000 icy touches across the skin beneath the gambeson. You pull a handful of rings slightly away from the rest and watch them fall back with a soft metallic sigh. A few scholars studying battlefield accounts note that knights often warmed their armor simply by moving, marching, lifting, tightening straps, swinging weapons, all built heat gradually. The armor that once felt frozen eventually became almost comfortable, sometimes even hot with exertion. You imagine a knight stepping outside into the cold courtyard, breath clouding the air, each movement awakening the warmth trapped beneath layers of cloth and steel. You walk across the room toward a small barrel filled with leather straps and gloves. Gloves were essential for cold weather combat. You pick up a pair and feel the stiffness of waxed leather beneath your fingertips. These gloves protected hands during battle, but also insulated against the cold steel of weapons. Leather absorbs heat slowly, creating a buffer between skin and the biting cold of metal sword hilts. You imagine gripping a sword on a winter night and feeling the cold vibrate through your arms despite the gloves. In one corner sits a sturdy wooden bench. You sit on it, imagining knights gathering here before dawn. Perhaps a few of them joke about the cold while pulling on their winter layers. Another grumbles as he attempts to warm his boots near a brazier. Someone else carefully oils his armor to keep the metal from becoming brittle. The process of suiting up must have echoed with clinks, snaps, muttered complaints, and quiet determination. You rise and walk toward a door leading to an open archway. A blast of cold air rushes toward you like a sharp breath from winter itself. Here, just beyond the threshold, is where knights trained, practiced, and prepared for cold weather combat. You stand in the doorway and imagine stepping onto the training ground in full armor, the steel stiff at first, your breath clouding in front of you. The first few swings of your sword would sting, the cold pushing through your gloves. But as you moved, the heat in your body would grow, warming the gambeson, softening the stiff straps, and turning your armor from an icy burden into a protective second skin. A note from medieval training guides mentions that knights practiced winter maneuvers intentionally to become accustomed to the conditions. Fighting in cold armor required resilience, strength, and the ability to stay focused despite the numbness creeping into fingers and toes. You picture a line of armored figures moving across a snowy courtyard, their metal glittering under grey skies, steam rising from their breaths like miniature clouds. Stepping back inside, you feel the cold air fade behind you as the relative mildness of the armory returns. You walk past the racks of armor again, feeling the contrast between warmth from effort and the stubborn cold of untouched metal. Knights learned to read that contrast intuitively, mastering not just the art of war but the art of enduring winter inside armor that cared nothing for human temperature. You move toward the far door, leaving behind the cold steel and the imagined clatter of winter training. Ahead lies the world outside the castle walls, where knights would face the full force of winter on exposed battlements and wind-blown towers. You push open the next door, and the cold that pours through feels different from anything inside the castle. Sharper, wilder, untamed. It wraps around your face like a slap of winter itself. You step forward onto a narrow walkway, and the world expands abruptly around you. You are on the battlements, high above the courtyard, exposed to the full fury of the wind that races across the stone like a living force. The sky hangs low, thick with clouds. Your breath turns to mist the moment it leaves your lips. This is where knights and guards spent some of the harshest hours of their lives. Watch duty, patrols, long stretches of standing, listening, staring into the darkness for any sign of movement. The cold up here does not just bite, it burrows. It steals warmth from your hands, your ears, your feet. It tests your patience and your endurance, reminding you with every gust that stone walls can protect you from enemies, but not from winter. You pull your cloak tighter, though it flaps wildly in the wind. Even the thickest wool feels thin up here. You take a few steps along the wall walk. The stones under your feet are slick with frost, and your boots slide slightly as you adjust your balance. You imagine a knight gripping the parapet with numb fingers while scanning the horizon. His armor clinks quietly in the wind. His cloak snaps like a flag behind him. His breath leaves in ragged puffs, barely noticed after hours in the cold. A commonly described feature in castle accounts is that guard duty rotated frequently in winter. You can see why. The wind slices through every gap in your clothing. It pushes against you with surprising strength. You take another step, and the chill finds the back of your neck instantly. Even layered clothing could not completely guard against this exposure, so guards worked in shifts that allowed them to warm themselves by the fire below, or grab a hot drink before returning to the wall. You pause and place your hand on the crenellated stone. The surface is icy. Your fingertips slip slightly on the frozen top. You imagine a knight standing exactly here, perhaps half asleep from a long night, fingers wrapped around the hilt of his sword for warmth as much as for vigilance. His eyes scan the long stretch of forest beyond the walls. Trees sway violently in the wind, their branches rattling like bones. Somewhere below, a dog barks. Somewhere far off, an owl cries out into the grey. Near your feet rests a small clay lantern. You crouch to pick it up. Its interior is blackened from soot. Someone must have stood here long ago with this lantern glowing weakly in the wind, shielding it with their hand to light their path. The flicker of such a flame would have offered both comfort and a tiny measure of warmth. You cup your hand around the lantern, feeling how the wind slips between your fingers, relentless and cold. A detail from descriptions of castle life mentions that guards often brought heated stones or small hand warmers with them to the battlements. You imagine one tucked into a cloak pocket, radiating a faint glow against the chest of a weary knight. It would not have kept him fully warm, but it would have been just enough to keep frostbite away from fingers stiffening inside gloves. You walk farther along the battlements, feeling the wind change direction as you pass between two towers. The air funnels sharply here, pulling at your cloak with an invisible hand. You stumble slightly, catching yourself on the parapet. This spot must have been infamous among guards, a place where the wind seemed to enjoy pushing people off balance. You imagine someone muttering a half-joking curse about this part of the wall every time winter intensified. In the corner beneath a protective overhang, a small alcove holds a wooden crate. You kneel to open it. Inside are wool hoods, spare gloves, and a thick cloak folded neatly. These were likely kept as emergency supplies. Guards could exchange soaked gloves for dry ones, or cover their heads with extra padding when the temperatures dropped during the night. Even small changes in warmth made a tremendous difference when standing still for hours in cutting wind. You pause to look beyond the parapet. The landscape stretches toward the horizon, white with frost. Smoke curls faintly from nearby cottages. The world appears frozen in silence, but you know that silence can be deceptive. Guards had to listen closely, straining to distinguish between winter noises and potential threats. The wind whispers through the battlements with a mournful sound, but beneath it, you catch the muted echo of a distant hammer, maybe from a blacksmith still at work. In one hand, you pick up a wooden horn resting on a hook. Cold air fills the instrument. Guards used these to signal danger, call for relief, or alert others when the cold became unbearable. You lift it to your lips and blow gently. The note that emerges is deep and trembling, carried instantly away by the wind. You set the horn back and walk past another tower. This one has an interior room, a small square shelter where guards could retreat momentarily to warm themselves from body heat alone. You step inside. The air feels calmer here. Still cold, but not slicing. The walls are thick, the ceiling low. A small bench sits against the wall. You imagine two guards huddled here, shoulders touching, sharing a hand warmer while trading stories to distract themselves from the cold. One might wrap his cloak around both of them for a moment, creating a makeshift cocoon before they take their next round along the wall. A curious note from winter patrol descriptions mentions that some guards performed small movements while on duty, not enough to attract attention or misinterpretation, but enough to keep blood flowing. A guard might clench and unclench his fists inside his gloves, shift his weight from foot to foot, lift his shoulders and drop them again. These tiny habits became almost automatic, learned by anyone who survived a few winters. As you step back out of the shelter, the wind slams into you again, colder now, as if insulted by your brief reprieve. You breathe out slowly, watching your breath swirl away. To your right, you see the staircase leading down. You imagine a guard stepping down those stairs after finishing his shift, his legs trembling slightly from hours in the cold, his face flushed and pale at once, his hands instinctively reaching for warmth the moment he enters the corridor below. You take one last long look across the battlements. Knights endured this bitter cold because vigilance mattered. Walls had to be watched. Shadows had to be studied. Winter transformed watch duty into an ordeal, but it also sharpened the senses. You imagine the quiet pride a guard might feel after surviving an entire night atop the battlements without leaving his post or losing focus. Then you descend the stairs, each step taking you away from the raw bite of the wind and back into the heavy, muffled cold of the castle's interior. As you reach the bottom, you feel the numbness lifting slightly, replaced by the soft promise of warmth somewhere deeper inside the fortress. Ahead lies another truth of medieval life, one shaped by journeys far from the safety of walls, winter travel, and the warmth nights carried with them on the road. You step away from the battlements and follow a sloping ramp toward one of the castle's outer gates. The stone passageway stretches ahead in a long descent, and with each step, the air grows colder again. But this time, the cold feels different. It waits outside the walls, stretched across distant roads and forests where knights traveled on missions, escorted caravans, delivered messages, or simply returned home through the bitter grip of winter. When you pass through the gatehouse and emerge into the open world beyond, you feel that unmistakable wilderness chill settle instantly across your shoulders. Traveling in winter was never gentle. You look down the road that winds away from the castle, a river of pale frost piercing through a quiet landscape. Your breath hangs in front of you as you walk, leaving soft clouds behind like tiny ghosts. Snow crunches beneath your boots, muffling each step. The world around you feels still, but not peaceful. It is the kind of stillness that hides danger in cold silence. A horse waits near the gate, its breath rising in thick plumes. As you approach, the heat emanating from its body feels almost miraculous. You run a hand along its neck, feeling the warmth trapped in its thick winter coat. Horses were essential travel companions not only for speed but also for warmth. Leaning against a horse could warm frozen hands or soften the sting of winter wind on a rider's legs. You imagine a knight placing a gloved hand on the animal as he swings into the saddle, grateful for the heat radiating upward. The horse shifts its weight. You feel the saddle beneath your fingers. It is padded, thick with wool and leather. Riders needed such padding in winter, not for comfort alone, but to keep their thighs from going numb during long journeys. Wool stuffed beneath the leather trapped body heat, and the saddle blankets wrapped around the animal served a double purpose, keeping both horse and rider warmer. You mount the horse and imagine setting out onto the frozen road. Wind rushes against your face immediately, turning your eyes watery even beneath a hood. Winter riders often lowered their heads, pulling cloaks tightly around their throats to keep the cold from slicing into them. You tug your imaginary cloak closer, feeling its heavy wool settle against your shoulders like a shield. A widely known detail from travelers' journals is that winter cloaks were often coated with a light layer of oil or wax to make them resistant to moisture. Snow slid off more easily, preventing the dangerous chill that came from wet fabric. You lift your cloak and feel the faint stiffness of waxed wool. It rustles slightly as you shift, but the warmth it traps is worth the subtle rigidity. Farther down the road, you see a small group of riders moving slowly, their cloaks billowing in the wind. You join them in your imagination. Traveling in numbers was safer and warmer. Bodies shielded one another from the wind. Extra hands could gather firewood or hold blankets in place while someone else dismounted. Companionship itself became a source of warmth. You picture the group stopping beneath a cluster of bare trees as dusk approaches. The sky deepens to grey. Snow begins to fall, not swirling flakes, but steady, soft ones that settle quickly on cloaks and helmets. One rider swings off his horse and begins clearing a small area on the ground while another pulls a bundle of firewood from a pack. Lighting a fire in winter required patience and skill. Dry wood was precious. Many travelers packed kindling in wax-treated cloths to ensure they could spark a flame, even in damp conditions. As the riders huddle around the newborn flame, its heat spreads outward in a small but determined circle. You kneel beside the fire and hold your hands toward it. The warmth feels hopeful in the growing darkness. Someone passes around a small pot filled with heated wine or ale. The drink warms the throat and chest, sending a slow ripple of comfort through the body. It is easy to imagine laughter rising here, soft voices blending with the crackle of the fire. Beside the fire, blankets lie spread over the ground. Woven from heavy wool, they offer a place to sit away from the cold earth. You pull one around your shoulders and feel its weight. A handful of medieval travel accounts mention blankets lined with fur for winter expeditions. These were treasured. A knight might sleep with one pulled over his head, letting his breath warm the small space beneath. As night deepens, you imagine the group settling into their cold camp. Horses stand close, their bodies radiating heat. The riders sit or lie near the fire, wrapping blankets around themselves, sharing whatever warmth they can. The wind rustles through the branches overhead, carrying distant sounds across the frozen landscape. Guards take turns staying awake, watching the fire, listening for trouble. The cold shapes every movement. No one dares remove gloves for more than a moment. Even drawing a sword would sting the fingers. You picture dawn arriving. Pale light spills across the campsite. Frost coats the blankets. The fire has diminished to faint red embers. You kneel and blow gently until the coals glow brighter, then add small pieces of wood until a flame rises again. Warmth spreads through your body as the fire wakes with you. Someone pours water into a small pot and warms it into tea. Steam lifts in gentle curls, carrying the soft scent of herbs. Travel resumes. You mount the horse again and feel the cold settle around you like a heavy cloak, but movement creates heat. Within minutes, your body warms inside your layers. Wool softens, your breath steadies. You ride with others along a narrow path bordered by frozen brush. Snow crunches beneath hooves. The sun struggles behind thick clouds. But each step takes you closer to another village or lodge, where warmth awaits. A modest traveler's shelter appears on the horizon. Smoke rises from a chimney. When you and your companions enter, the warm interior hits like a gentle wave. Straw covers the floor. A small fire burns near the center. The smell of stewed vegetables fills the air. You remove your gloves, letting your fingers awaken with prickles of returning warmth. You sit with others near the hearth, feeling your body thaw slowly. Some shelters hung cloaks to dry on pegs placed high above the fire. You look up and see the dark shapes of cloaks swaying gently from the heat rising below. You imagine taking yours off and hanging it there, watching the steam curl into the air as it dries. Riders often place their boots near the fire too, letting the leather soften and warm before setting out again. You take a seat on a simple bench and look into the fire. Sparks fly upward. Heat washes across your face, erasing the cold that clung to your cheeks outside. The world beyond these walls remains harsh, but for now, warmth settles in your bones. Somewhere nearby, a horse stomps softly in its stall. A kettle whistles. Voices murmur comfortably. Winter travel demanded grit, patience, and cleverness. Yet knights did not face the cold alone. They had blankets, fires, hot drinks, shared bodies, thick cloaks, sturdy horses, and small shelters where warmth could gather like hope. As you leave the lodge and step once more into the open air, the cold embraces you again, but the memory of warmth lingers inside your chest, long after the fire's glow fades behind you, and you walk back toward the castle, ready to glimpse how even winter training challenged the cold in surprising ways. You return toward the castle, and as you slip back through the gatehouse, the cold clings to your cloak like a stubborn shadow. You stamp the snow from your boots and shake off the winter wind, but the air inside the castle feels only a little warmer than the icy landscape outside. Still, the faint sound of wooden clatter and muffled voices drifting somewhere deeper inside catches your attention. You follow the noise down a long corridor until you reach a broad training yard sheltered by towering walls. The cold here feels sharp and honest, but what draws your eye is the group of figures moving through the frost, practicing forms and drills, despite the winter pressing against them from all sides. Winter training never stopped. Knights needed to keep their bodies strong, their reflexes sharp, and their spirits resilient. You step onto the packed snow and feel the crisp crunch beneath your boots. The ground is firm, almost icy, and your feet slip slightly before you regain your balance. A few knights across the yard are already hard at work, their breaths puffing out in thick bursts, forming white clouds that vanish quickly into the frigid air. You walk closer, observing how each movement generates heat. A knight swings a wooden practice sword in wide arcs. The blade whistles through the air, and each repetition sends a ripple of warmth rising through his padded gambeson. Another knight ducks and pivots, rolling lightly on the balls of his feet, shaking off the cold that clings to his limbs. Movement was essential in winter. Staying still too long risked stiffness, numbness, even danger. But once the blood started pumping, the body fought back against the cold with surprising efficiency. A commonly mentioned detail in descriptions of medieval martial routines is that training sessions grew shorter in winter, but more focused. Knights drilled in bursts, not marathon sessions. Warm up, exert, rest, warm up again. It kept muscles supple without letting the icy air settle too deeply into bones. You place your hand on a nearby wooden pole and feel its chill. Even this simple object resists the cold differently than stone. Weapons and training tools stayed cold for hours, forcing hands to adapt constantly. A young squire runs past you carrying a bundle of wooden practice shields. His cheeks are bright red. His breath forms a cloud behind him. He sets the shields near the center of the yard and begins stacking them methodically. You watch him shift his weight from foot to foot, a subtle habit meant to keep his toes warm inside stiff leather boots. Even the untrained youth of the castle learned how to create warmth through movement alone. In another corner of the yard, a knight wearing only his gambeson spars with a partner who wields a blunted spear. The spear tip thuds against the padded armor with dull impacts. The sound echoes across the yard, bouncing off the walls. You notice how their faces are flushed, not with embarrassment or fatigue, but with the glow that comes from a body fighting the cold from the inside out. Their arms move quickly, forming arcs and counters, and soon their breaths merge with the faint steam rising from their shoulders. You step closer to a rack holding several wooden swords and staffs. You lift one, feeling the icy wood in your hands. It bites at your palms, just long enough to remind you of the cold's persistence. You imagine practicing drills in weather like this, each swing slowly warming your fingers, each grip strengthening as the wood becomes more familiar. Knights often rubbed beeswax into wooden weapons to keep them from cracking in cold climates. You pass your thumb along a smooth, waxed surface and feel its faint resistance. Another knight across the yard is jogging in place, lifting his knees high, shaking out his arms. He smiles wryly at the cold, as if challenging it. Some training routines included exercises specifically aimed at winter endurance, running short laps around the yard, doing push-ups in snow, sparring in frost. These routines taught knights to handle shivering muscles, stiff joints, and the slow creep of numbness. Winter training built resilience as much as skill. You turn your head as a sharp clank echoes across the space. Two knights wearing partial armor circle each other, training in slow, controlled movements. Steam wafts from their helmets as they breathe heavily. The cold metal fogs with each exhale. You imagine how uncomfortable it must be to train in armor during winter, the steel freezing at first, then slowly warming as the body works. A knight's discipline required overcoming that initial shock, focusing on form and footwork rather than the sting of cold metal against padding. One knight pauses between drills and moves toward a small brazier placed against the wall. The coals glow faintly. He holds his gloved hands above them, warming his fingertips. Not enough to get comfortable, just enough to keep his joints limber. Nearby, another knight stretches his arms, rotating his shoulders to keep the muscles loose. Winter training included constant stretching. Tight muscles in cold weather could cause injuries faster than a dull blade. A curious entry from one old training guide describes winter footwork drills done on slippery ground to improve balance. You glance at the icy surface below your feet and imagine knights intentionally practicing on it, sliding slightly, catching themselves, learning to control their center of gravity even when the earth beneath them refuses to cooperate. The skill would be essential in real battle, where winter terrain could not be chosen or avoided. You wander toward the far side of the yard, where a wooden dummy stands covered in straw. Frost coats the straw in delicate crystals, making the dummy glitter like a strange winter statue. A knight approaches and delivers a series of strikes, sending tiny flecks of frost into the air. His shoulders rise and fall with effort. His breath clouds around him. Yet with every strike, his movements become smoother, more confident, as though the cold sharpens rather than hinders him. Nearby, a pile of fur-lined cloaks rests on a bench. These are worn during breaks, draped over shoulders while knights catch their breath. You pick one up and feel its thick, hearty warmth. It must feel luxurious after a round of drills in the freezing air. A knight sits on the bench now, wrapping himself in one of the cloaks. His face relaxes slightly as warmth begins to chase away the stiffness from his fingers and arms. Then a whistle blows. Break time is over. The cloaks come off. The knights return to the yard. The cold snaps at them immediately, sharp and persistent, but they move with purpose, already generating new warmth through effort. You hear grunts, laughter, muttered encouragement. Even in winter, camaraderie warms the air in ways fires cannot. You take one last walk around the yard. Frost glitters on the ground. Breath hangs in the air like pale ribbons. The castle walls stand silent and unrelenting around the practice area. Yet in the center of it all, knights move like living sparks, turning cold into fuel for discipline. As you leave the training yard and head toward the next doorway, the cold trails behind you. but you carry the memory of moving bodies, warm in motion, facing winter with relentless determination. Ahead lies another corner of medieval life, the remedies, concoctions, and comforting practices that helped people endure winter's toll on their bodies. You step away from the training yard, your ears still echoing with the wooden thud of practice blows and the sharp hiss of breath rising in cold air. The corridor ahead grows quieter, calmer, dimmer, and the chill here feels older, settled deep into the stones. As you walk, a faint, earthy scent begins to weave through the air: dried herbs, beeswax, and something slightly sweet. It draws you toward a smaller chamber tucked behind a heavy wooden door. When you push it open, the atmosphere shifts instantly. The room feels warmer here, not because of fire, but because of care. This is the healer's room, a place where medieval remedies stood as the final defense against the grip of winter. You step inside and breathe deeply. The air tastes of rosemary, mint, and smoke-soaked wool. Bundles of herbs hang from the rafters, their dried leaves crackling softly in the stillness. A wooden table sits at the center, covered with ceramic jars, mortar and pestle, folded cloths, and small clay cups lined neatly in rows. The space feels humble, practical, and strangely comforting, a sanctuary for those worn thin by cold, exhaustion, or the countless aches winter could stir. You approach the table and lift the lid from a small jar. Inside is a thick paste made from animal fat, beeswax, and crushed herbs. You dip your finger lightly into the surface. The salve feels smooth, slightly oily. A widely referenced detail from medieval household remedies explains that such mixtures were used to protect skin from chapping winds and frostbite. Knights often rubbed them onto their cheeks, fingers, and even the edges of their ears before venturing outdoors. The wax formed a shield against the cold, while the herbs soothed cracked skin. You set the jar down gently and reach for a cloth bundle tied with string. When you open it, a comforting aroma rises from within: lavender, mixed with dried petals and something resinous. Cloth sachets like this were tucked under pillows, pressed into cloaks, or warmed near fires to ease winter-borne congestion. You lift the sachet to your face and breathe in. It feels like warmth settling into your chest. Your eyes drift toward a row of bottles filled with deep red and golden liquids. These must be infusions and tinctures, preserved during the warmer months for moments exactly like this. You pick one up, holding it toward the light. The liquid within glows faintly. A familiar note from medieval herbals describes warming drinks brewed from ginger, honey, and wine. These mixtures were thought to invigorate the blood and chase out the cold that settled into muscles after long nights. A knight returning from patrol might drink a small cup, letting the heat spread slowly through his body. On the far table sits a pot warming over a modest ember pan. You walk toward it and lift the lid. The steam rises in gentle curls, carrying the soft scent of thyme and elderflower. This was a winter remedy for sore throats and coughs, made from herbs believed to help open the lungs. You can imagine a weary guard standing here at dawn, hands wrapped around a warm cup of the brew, sighing with relief as the steam eased the ache in his chest. Nearby rests a mortar filled with crushed pine needles. Some healers used pine in salves or teas for its sharp, invigorating properties. You roll a pinch of the crushed green between your fingers and feel the sticky sap cling lightly to your skin. Someone once gathered these needles from the forest, carrying them back to the castle as part of the quiet battle against winter illness. A small brazier sits in the corner, glowing faintly. You kneel beside it. Someone has tossed dried rosemary onto the coals, filling the room with a cleansing scent. Warming the air with fragrant smoke was believed to purify spaces and guard against winter sickness. Whether or not the belief held scientific truth, the smell is undeniably soothing, creating a sense of peace in this small healing refuge. Against the far wall lies a stack of soft woolen blankets, folded neatly. You feel one between your fingers. It is thick, heavy, and faintly scented with herbs. Knights, suffering from winter soreness, would be wrapped in blankets like these, sometimes after being rubbed with warming oils. You imagine someone lying beneath one now, eyes half closed, letting the warmth soak into tired limbs. A curious practice mentioned in a few winter accounts comes to mind: heated poultices made from mustard seeds or ground garlic. These were spread onto cloth and placed on stiff shoulders or aching joints to create a deep, penetrating heat. You open a clay pot nearby and catch the sharp scent of mustard. The warmth it produced could sometimes border on painful, but people who endured the sting often swore by its effectiveness. You walk toward a shelf lined with small wooden boxes, Inside each box are preserved dried berries, rose hips, elderberries, hawthorn. These berries, steeped into winter teas, provided essential nutrients when fresh fruit was scarce. You lift a rosehip and roll it in your palm. Its surface is slightly wrinkled, but the scent that rises when you crush it between your fingers is bright and surprisingly alive. A leather-bound book lies open on a lectern, its pages filled with notes in faded ink. You glance at the writing. It lists remedies for chills, fevers, aches, and the creeping lethargy winter often brings. The handwriting shifts in style from page to page, suggesting many hands contributed over the years. This book is a quiet testament to collective wisdom, shared across generations to help the castle endure year after year. On another table rests a bowl filled with heated stones wrapped in cloth. These stones would have been placed on chests, backs, or feet, providing gentle heat to ease stiffness. You lift one. Even now, after cooling, it holds a faint whisper of warmth. You imagine a knight lying still while a healer placed such stones along his spine, letting the heat unravel the tension gathered during cold weather training. You look toward a corner where a steaming pot of broth rests, its surface shimmering softly. Broth was more than food, it was medicine. A warm bowl soothed stomachs chilled by winter meals eaten too quickly, restored energy after a night on watch duty, and comforted anyone weakened by cold or fatigue. You imagine sipping the broth now, feeling the warmth unfurl in slow, steady waves. A faint draught brushes your cheek, reminding you that even in this sanctuary, winter lingers outside the door. But the remedies around you speak of a different kind of warmth, the warmth of care, of knowledge, of tending to bodies pushed to their limits by cold stone corridors and frozen battlements. You step back toward the door, letting the gentle scent of herbs linger in your lungs. As you return to the corridor, the cold greets you again, but this time it feels less overwhelming. You have seen how medieval people fought the cold, not only with fire and architecture, but with small comforts, warm drinks, healing hands, and a stubborn spirit. Ahead lies another realm of winter survival, the realm of superstition, symbolism, and the little rituals people believed could keep away the cold that stone and fire could not always conquer. You walk through another narrow corridor, the cold following you like a persistent shadow. But as you turn into the next chamber, something feels different. Not warmer exactly, but charged in a quiet, almost expectant way. The air holds a faint scent of smoke, dried herbs, and beeswax. Strange shapes hang from the rafters, subtle enough to blend with the dimness, yet noticeable the moment your eyes adjust. This is not a place of fire or medicine. This is a room where belief lived. A room where medieval people fought winter with symbols, charms, and gentle rituals that offered comfort when the cold felt like a force far bigger than stone or flesh. You step inside slowly, letting the stillness settle around you. The first thing you notice is a bundle of dried evergreen branches hanging near the doorway. The needles are brittle, their scent faint but lingering. Evergreen branches symbolized lasting life in the dead of winter, a reminder that not everything bowed to the season's brutal rule. People sometimes hung them above doorways or over beds to invite strength into the room and keep the worst chills at bay. On a wooden shelf nearby rests a bowl filled with coarse salt. You run your fingers through the crystals. Salt held practical value, of course, but it also carried symbolic weight. Some families sprinkled it near windows or thresholds during storms, believing it would keep bad spirits and with them, the cold from slipping inside. Whether or not it worked physically mattered less than the reassurance it provided on nights when the wind screamed like a living thing. You wander toward a corner of the room, where strings of small objects hang from pegs, bits of ribbon, carved wooden tokens, tiny bells, a few coins polished to a shine. These charms, simple though they look, captured the hope of people who wanted warmth to return quickly. A shepherd's token might hang beside a small carving of a sun. A bit of fur tied with twine might hang beside a copper bell, meant to chase away lingering spirits of cold weather. Each charm tells a quiet story of someone trying to feel safe in winters that tested every layer of body and mind. On a low table sits a candle stub embedded into a metal dish. You crouch beside it and see markings drawn in faint lines around the rim. Some families made a ritual of lighting a candle at dusk during the darkest weeks of winter, whispering small wishes for warmth or protection. The flame itself became a symbol of stubborn resistance, a tiny sun ignited against the vast freeze outside. A small bundle wrapped in cloth catches your attention next. When you unwrap it, you find a smooth stone with a spiral carved into the surface. The spiral is shallow, but intentional. People sometimes kept carved stones by their beds or tucked them into clothing for winter travels. These tokens were believed to guide warmth back to the body or help the spirit stay strong through the coldest nights. You close your fingers around it. It feels cool now, but you can imagine how comforting it might have felt if warmed by a candle flame. Another curious practice, recorded in scattered folk notes, lies displayed on a second table. Dried apple slices strung into a loop. You lift the loop gently. The fruit has long lost its sweetness, but the symbolism remains. Apples represented health and the return of spring. Some households hung them by windows, believing they could coax back fertility and warmth to the land when winter dug in stubbornly. On the far side of the room sits a narrow wooden bench with a small bowl placed neatly upon it. Inside the bowl is a mixture of dried rosemary, pine needles, and small chips of resin. A few scattered notes hint that burning such blends on cold nights was believed to strengthen walls against creeping cold. You lift a pinch of the mixture and inhale. The scent is sharp and grounding, something that might make even a freezing castle feel a little safer. You notice symbols drawn on the stone wall, faint circles, crossed lines, small sun shapes, etched into the surface by someone's hand long ago. These simple marks would have been made in the hope of inviting warmth or blocking misfortune. You trace one lightly with your fingertip, imagining the person who stood here shivering in the candlelight, quietly making these shapes because they believed the marks could tip winter's balance. A small wooden chest in the corner calls to you next. You open it and find scraps of blue and red cloth neatly folded. Some winter rituals involve tying bits of colored cloth to tools or doors as a sign of resilience. Red for vitality, blue for calm. These small gestures brought comfort in a season that could feel endless, especially within castle walls where light often came only from fire or fading daytime. One of the most unusual items sits on a higher shelf, a twisted lump of beeswax molded into a rough shape resembling a sunburst. You pick it up. It smells sweet, faintly smoky. People sometimes made wax charms during long winter nights while sitting near the hearth, shaping them with cold stiffened fingers into symbols meant to anchor hope. When the wax melted accidentally or cracked, it was said to represent winter loosening its grip. A soft breeze drifts into the room through a narrow window slit. Even here, cold attempts to intrude. You watch a bundle of herbs sway slightly, a mixture of juniper and bay leaves. Some households believed that these plants encouraged warmth to stay indoors. Whether or not that was true physically, there is a gentle comfort in knowing people found meaning in small gestures like this. You sit on the wooden bench for a moment, letting the quiet surround you. In a world where fires could go out, blankets could become threadbare, and food might run low, belief filled the gaps that practicality could not reach. These rituals were less about controlling winter and more about giving people a sense of agency in a season that often felt overwhelming. You rise and take one last look around. Every charm, every herb, every mark on the wall whispers the same message. Humans have always sought warmth, not only in body but in spirit. These rituals held people together during nights when cold pressed too tightly against stone, when the wind howled like something hungry, when the world outside seemed lifeless. You step back into the corridor. The cold greets you as always, but now you carry with you a sense of the gentler warmth people once created through belief. Ahead, the castle's architecture waits to show you how builders themselves tried to shape warmth into stone. You leave the small chamber of charms and symbols behind, stepping once more into the familiar draft of the corridor. The air here carries a sharper edge than before, as if it has rushed to fill the space you just left. Your footsteps echo softly as you walk, guided toward an arched passageway that curves upward. As you climb, the stone around you grows more carefully shaped, more deliberate. You sense the shift before you see it. When you emerge into the next room, you arrive in a part of the castle where winter was fought, not with cloaks or fire or superstition, but with stone itself. This is where medieval architects tried to tame the cold through design. At first glance, the room seems simple. Bare stone walls, high ceiling, and a narrow window slit overlooking the landscape. But as you step inside, you feel the difference almost immediately. The air here is less piercing, less chaotic. The drafts you felt in earlier corridors do not sweep through this space with the same carelessness. Instead, the room seems to hold its chill more evenly, as if the cold has been persuaded to behave rather than lash out in every direction. You walk along the wall and notice the thickness of the stone beneath your hand. It is massive, dense, built not only for defense, but to regulate temperature. A well-documented observation from the study of medieval engineering reveals that castle walls were sometimes intentionally layered: thick stone outside, rubble or packed earth in the middle, and smoother stone inside. This combination helped stabilize indoor temperatures. It was not warmth in any luxurious sense, but it softened the extremes of winter and summer alike. You run your fingers carefully along one seam in the stone, feeling how tightly the blocks fit. The precision is impressive. In some regions, masons placed blocks with such care that even without mortar, the seams resisted wind intrusion more effectively than poorly placed stones packed with it. You picture workers chiseling and fitting each block during construction. Not for comfort, they cared more about defense, but still creating spaces where warmth could linger more easily. A small alcove sits near the corner of the room. It looks like a simple stone niche at first, but when you reach into it, you feel warmer air gathered there, as if the structure gently cups heat like water in a palm. Many castles included these architectural pockets unintentionally, created by thick walls and corner angles that held onto warmth produced by nearby fires or by bodies moving through adjacent rooms. Residents learned these warm spots quickly and used them often, pausing to rest or warm their hands during long winter chores. You move toward the window slit. It is deeper than others you have seen, carved into a long taper that widens significantly on the interior side. This deep embrasure serves multiple purposes. It makes the window a defensible shooting position, but also reduces drafts by channeling cold air upward rather than outward into the room. You stand within the deep stone funnel and feel how the wind brushes past in a vertical glide rather than slapping into your face. You imagine a builder centuries ago discovering this effect by chance, adjusting the cut of the embrasure because it made the cold slightly less aggressive. A shelf near the wall holds a few old pieces of timber. You lift one and see that it is shaped in a curve, part of an old roof brace. Roof angles played an important role in how heat moved through a castle. Steeper roofs prevented snow from piling too heavily, reducing cold pressure from above. Some roofs included inner void spaces where warm air could rise and drift, keeping lower floors more temperate. You picture workers clambering along beams, freezing hands gripping tools, trying to angle rafters just right to help heat travel more kindly. You turn toward the far side of the chamber, where a narrow staircase spirals upward. You climb carefully, feeling the temperature shift with each step. At the top, you reach a small lookout room, yet another example of architecture shaping warmth. This chamber is compact, almost snug, with thick walls and a tiny window slit shaped like a keyhole. Rooms like this, placed above the main halls, often collected rising heat from floors below. You touch the stone and feel it slightly warmer than expected, the faint residue of warmth drawn upward through the castle's body. Something catches your eye, a small circular opening near the ceiling. At first it looks like damage, but when you step closer, you realize it was intentional. Builders sometimes carved ventilation holes to regulate smoke or heat. If placed cleverly, these holes acted like miniature chimneys, letting warm air rise and cold air leave. Whether the design was based on intuition or experiment varies from castle to castle, but the effect could transform a freezing room into a somewhat tolerable one. Descending again, you return to the main chamber and study a curious pattern on the floor. A raised stone platform sits along one wall, modest in size but distinct enough to notice. You kneel and feel the temperature. Warmer. A soft, radiating warmth hums against your palm. This platform sits directly above a room where fires likely burned, often perhaps a kitchen or a guardroom. Heat traveled upward, bleeding through the stone. Builders sometimes placed sleeping quarters or private chambers above such heat sources deliberately. You imagine someone centuries ago discovering that this room felt warmer than others and assigning it to someone important enough to deserve the subtle luxury. You walk along the far wall and stop beneath an arch where two support columns are fused seamlessly into the stone. The columns stand slightly forward from the wall itself. Airflow moves differently here, curling around the columns and losing strength before it can sweep across the room. Whether or not the builders intended these aerodynamic effects, you cannot deny that the cold behaves differently here. The room feels calmer, structured, thoughtful in its relationship with winter. A small doorway leads into an adjacent passage, narrow and steep. As you step inside, you sense that the walls here tighten sound and heat more effectively. These narrow passages were often built intentionally between rooms to act as buffers, airlocks, before airlocks existed. They helped keep the temperature from swinging too wildly between different parts of the castle. You run your fingertips along the stone, feeling how smooth the surface becomes at shoulder height from countless hands brushing past for centuries. Returning to the main chamber, you notice something else. The ceiling curves. Rather than forming a flat horizontal plane, it arches upward gracefully. This curve traps warm air more gently. Instead of collecting in one spot and escaping through cracks, the warmth circulates longer before dissipating. You walk beneath the arch and almost feel the faint lift in temperature, like the air has learned how to settle more comfortably. One interesting feature of this chamber lies along the southern wall. The builders placed small, angled recesses that likely held candles. When lit, the recesses' shape amplified the warmth and light, reflecting heat outward rather than letting it vanish into the stone. You imagine a series of candles burning here on a winter night, their flames reflected in little pockets of stone, turning the cold room into a dim, peaceful sanctuary. You pause in the center of the room and take it all in: the thick walls, the deep windows, the angled ceilings, the clever use of neighboring heat, the traps for warmth, and the channels for drafts. None of this made the castle warm by modern standards. The builders did not have insulation foam or double glazing or airtight construction, but they learned through experience, intuition, and sheer necessity how to shape stone to soften the harshness of winter. You run your hand along the stone once more. It still feels cool, but no longer hostile. This room, with its careful design, carries the quiet triumph of people who lived in a brutal climate and refused to surrender to it fully. As you walk toward the next doorway, you sense that the castle is leading you to a different kind of warmth now, one not made by fire or stone or clever construction, but by people, by gatherings, celebrations, and the shared heat of community in the heart of winter. You step through the doorway and find yourself moving toward a soft spill of golden light. The corridor narrows, then gently widens, and with each step you hear it, a low hum of voices, the faint pluck of stringed instruments, the rhythmic thump of feet against wood. You round a final corner and enter a hall that feels nothing like the cold, stoic chambers you have passed through. This space is alive. Warmth gathers here not from fire alone, but from people, from bodies, laughter, music, and ceremony. It wraps around you like a velvet cloak the moment you step inside. The hall is not enormous, but it glows. Long tables have been pushed aside, leaving a wide open space in the center. Candles flicker along the walls, their light bouncing off tapestries and brightening the faces of those gathered. A handful of musicians sit near the hearth, plucking gently at lutes and rebecks. The sound lifts into the air like drifting warmth of its own. People move slowly across the room in pairs or small groups, their cloaks draped loosely, their cheeks flushed from dancing or sipping warm drink. You walk farther in and feel the temperature rise noticeably. It is not just the fire in the large hearth, though the flames crackle steadily, sending waves of heat rolling out into the hall. It is the collective body heat of dozens of people gathered together. Warm laughter, warm breath, warm steps against the floor. Human presence becomes its own insulation. A detail often noted in winter accounts of castle life explains that gatherings like this were more than entertainment. They were strategic warmth. Music, dance, shared meals, even small ceremonies encouraged people to stay together in a single heated space rather than scatter to cold chambers. The effect was practical. The room grew warm enough that even the outer walls lost some of their bite. You find yourself watching a group near the center of the hall. They are performing a simple winter dance, stepping in a slow circle, hands linked loosely. Their boots scuff the floor with a rhythmic softness. Their movements are relaxed, not formal. The dance is more about staying warm than showing skill. You can almost feel their breath mingling in the air, their shared heat rising and swirling like invisible steam. A young servant passes by carrying a tray filled with cups. You lift one and feel the warmth radiating through the wooden surface. Inside is a spiced drink, perhaps mulled ale or warmed cider. You bring it to your lips. The taste is rich and comforting, the heat sliding down your throat and blooming softly in your chest. Hot drinks were not indulgences during winter gatherings. They were mild medicine, shared cheer, and warmth in liquid form. You walk toward a small platform where a storyteller stands. Their cloak is wrapped around their shoulders, and their hands gesture slowly as they speak. The group gathered at their feet leans in, their faces lit by candlelight. Stories held their own kind of warmth, the warmth of distraction, of shared imagination. People forgot the cold scraping at the windows when their minds walked through distant forests or listened to tales of summer lands far away. Behind you, the musicians shift into a livelier tune. The rhythm deepens, and more people join the dance. Boots thump, cloaks swirl. Someone laughs loudly, then claps their hands to the beat. You step nearer to the fire, feeling its heat join the glow of the crowd. The flames pulse upward, and the shadows dance with the people, as though the castle itself has decided to join in. A few children run past, wrapped in furs far too large for them. Their laughter rings like tiny bells. They chase one another around the outer edge of the hall, their breath trailing behind them in small clouds. Even their presence warms the room, not physically, perhaps, but emotionally. Winter feels less threatening when joy moves so freely. You notice something interesting as you look around. People unconsciously cluster in ways that spread warmth evenly. Some sit near the hearth, others press along the warmer inner walls. Those who grow too warm step nearer to the drafty edges before returning to the cozy center again. The entire gathering moves like a living organism, regulating its temperature. On one wall, a row of candles flickers in front of a large tapestry. The images woven into it glow softly in the shifting light. Someone has placed evergreen branches along its base, not for superstition this time, but simply to bring something green and alive into the winter hall. The scent of pine drifts gently through the air. A small group gathers near a table loaded with bread, roasted meat, and steaming bowls. You walk closer and see candles positioned strategically around the dishes, not just to illuminate the food but to prevent the chill from settling onto the surface. Warm food acts like a secondary hearth, drawing people together and adding subtle heat to the room. One woman stands by the fire, slowly turning a small drum in her hands. Its soft, steady beat blends with the music. Someone joins her, clapping in gentle rhythm. A few onlookers sway in time, their shoulders relaxing under the soft glow. Even those seated on benches contribute warmth. Cloaks draped across laps, hands wrapped around mugs, quiet conversations shared close together. A simple whisper becomes a shared moment of breath-warm air between friends. These small human acts, leaning close, laughing gently, touching hands, do as much for warmth as any brazier. A few accounts from winter feasts mention the use of heavy curtains to divide large halls into smaller, warmer pockets during cold months. Here, you see one drawn halfway across an alcove, creating a cozy nook where three figures sit shoulder to shoulder swapping stories. Their laughter rises in warm waves, filling the room like another thread of insulation. You take another sip of your warm drink. The hall glows with a golden haze. People move in soft rhythms. The fire hums. For a moment, winter feels distant, like something trapped outside the castle walls. When you finally turn toward the door, the warmth follows you gently. You feel it clinging to your clothing, your breath, your skin. You step into the corridor again, and the cold returns, brisk, indifferent, familiar. But the memory of the hall remains, settling inside you like a small ember. Ahead lies a darker stretch of the castle, where winter sometimes grew dangerous, overwhelming even the best efforts of fires, clothing, architecture, and celebration. But even in those moments, people persisted. You move away from the glow of the gathering hall, and almost immediately the cold tightens around you again. It creeps beneath your cloak, chills your arms, and sinks into the stone under your boots. The sudden contrast feels almost shocking, as though the castle wants to remind you that warmth is fragile here, temporary, something you must constantly defend. You walk down a long passage that slopes downward, and with each step, the light grows dimmer. The air thickens. The temperature drops. You feel the shift in your bones before you even reach the next room. When you step inside, the cold hits with a severity unlike anything you have felt so far. It settles instantly into your skin, your breath, your ribs. The chamber feels hollow and heavy at once. This is where winter became dangerous, where the techniques and tricks used throughout the castle sometimes simply weren't enough. Nights when the wind howled like a beast outside, when frost crept across walls, when illness spread faster than firelight, when people huddled together and prayed for the sun to rise. The room itself is plain, bare walls, a narrow slit of a window, a single extinguished brazier. The cold here feels alive. It snakes across the floor in silent waves. Your boots crunch lightly through thin layers of frost that have gathered in the cracks between the stones. You kneel and brush your fingers along the icy surface. Even indoors, winter could freeze water overnight. Even inside stone, winter could root itself so deeply that breath hung in the air like smoke from an invisible fire. A familiar detail from castle accounts describes winters so severe that water in buckets froze solid inside kitchens, that damp cloaks stiffened into frozen shells before they could be dried, that the air burned inside the lungs during early morning tasks. You stand and imagine a servant tiptoeing across this room at dawn, their breath misting heavily, their hands shaking as they try to coax a few stubborn embers back to life, their fingers numb after only a few seconds of exposure. You walk toward the window slit. A thin crust of ice clings to its edges. The world outside is a blur of white frost clinging to rooftops, snow drifting across battlements, clouds moving low and heavy as though they are pressing their weight directly onto the castle roof. The wind whistles through the slit in a sharp, icy note. You pull your cloak tighter across your chest. In winters like this, even strong fires struggled. Hearth flames sputtered against the cold. Wood burned quickly, consumed too fast for the warmth to settle into the walls. You touch a large stone block and feel its stubborn chill, as if it refuses to remember even a hint of heat. Some written winter accounts mention that people sometimes woke to find frost on their blankets, their breath crystallized on the inside of shutters, their beds cold and stiff where warmth had fled during the night. You imagine lying beneath layers of wool and fur, yet still shivering, still curling into yourself as the cold reached your bones despite everything. The harsh winter was an adversary that no blanket could fully tame. You walk deeper into the chamber and notice a row of wooden stools near the wall. Their surfaces are marked with faint rings where heated stones were placed the night before, only to cool too quickly as the cold gnawed at them. You picture someone sitting here, wrapped tightly in their cloak, holding a cloth-wrapped stone to their chest, trying to draw in its warmth before it faded. A few breaths, a few heartbeats, a small relief, then nothing. A narrow wooden door at the back of the room catches your attention. You push it open and find a smaller storage space beyond. Cold rushes out at you like a silent wolf. Here, the air feels even more brutal. Empty barrels line the walls, their surfaces frosted. A rope hangs stiffly from a beam. The silence is complete. You imagine how frightening this room must have felt during the hardest winters, when supplies dwindled, when the cold seemed to seep into every hope. You return to the main chamber and look up. The ceiling is coated in condensation that has frozen into tiny crystals, sparkling faintly in the dim light. You raise your hand toward them, feeling the air's bite growing sharper as you reach higher. A few crystals break and drift down like tiny shards of glass, harmless but haunting in their delicate fall. Near the hearth, you find a pile of charred wood. Someone tried to burn logs here recently, but the cold smothered the fire before it fully caught. You lift a blackened piece. It crumbles slightly in your fingers. Fires often needed constant tending in deep winter, and without fuel or attention, the warmth vanished quickly. A quiet observation from castle records notes that during dire winters, people sometimes slept in shifts, half keeping watch over the fire to ensure it didn't die, half resting under blankets. The castle felt like a living thing that needed caretaking, or else the cold would reclaim every corner. You sit on the edge of a wooden chest and draw a slow breath. The air stings your throat slightly. You imagine someone sitting here centuries ago, their breath fogging the air just like yours, their hands trembling with cold, their mind turning toward fear. Would the fire hold? Would the food last? Would illness spread? Winter could become a force of dread inside these walls, testing resilience in ways battle sometimes did not. You stand and walk toward a darker corner, where a thick curtain hangs. When you draw it aside, you find a small alcove behind it, just enough space for a single person to sleep. The curtain would have served as insulation, but in a winter like this, its fabric feels thin and powerless. You imagine someone pulling the curtain tight, curling into a blanket, and pressing their face close to the wall in search of the faint warmth radiating upward from the floors below. Another step brings you to a narrow staircase leading down. You pause before descending. The cold feels like a solid thing here, a weight pushing against your chest. Yet even in such harshness, people endured. They learned which rooms kept warmth longest, which walls breathed heat upward, which corners to avoid when frost settled too deeply. They made small adjustments, closing shutters early, stacking blankets, placing multiple warmers under beds, adding straw underfoot, sitting close together, singing or telling stories simply to keep the cold from overwhelming the mind. You lift your head and listen. In the distant corridor beyond the door, faint echoes of warmth call you back the promise of firelight, laughter, food, or simple comfort. You take a final breath of this bitter room, letting it remind you of the resilience that shaped life in these walls. Then you turn toward the exit. The cold trails after you like a lingering ghost, but ahead, warmth waits. And beyond that warmth lies the final chamber of this winter journey, where the castle's last embers glow and the night settles gently around everyone who survived another frozen day. You leave the coldest chamber behind and follow a quiet, winding corridor that seems to soften as you walk. The air grows calmer, the drafts weaken, a gentle glow spills from somewhere ahead, flickering softly across the walls like distant candlelight. Your steps slow without meaning to. Something in this part of the castle invites quiet. As you turn the final corner, you enter a room that feels like the end of a long winter path. Not fully warm, but warmer. Not bright, but softly lit. A room where the last embers of the castle settle into their nightly rest. The chamber is modest, low-ceilinged, tucked deep within the fortress like a protected heart. In the center, a small hearth burns with the kind of fire that no longer roars, it hums. The logs glow in deep shades of ember red, their heat subdued and steady. Shadows sway gently on the walls, rising and falling in unhurried waves. You walk toward the hearth and sit on a wooden bench placed nearby. The warmth brushes your face in soft breaths rather than blasts, a final comfort before sleep. This was the hour when the castle exhaled. Duties finished, fires tended, doors latched. People drifted here to gather the last heat before retiring to their cool chambers. You imagine a few figures trickling in, a sleepy guard loosening his cloak, a cook rubbing tired hands, a knight rolling the stiffness from his shoulders after a long day. They sit near the embers, not needing to speak. The quiet itself becomes a shared warmth. You stretch your hands toward the hearth. The feeling is gentle, like dipping your fingers into warm dusk. As the fire settles lower, the room grows more intimate. The ceiling feels closer. The walls feel softer under the dim orange glow. It is here, in this almost silent warmth, that the castle's winter life comes full circle. You study the objects placed around the hearth. A kettle sits near the coals, holding the last warm drink of the night. A stack of blankets rests on a stool, ready to be carried to cold chambers. A cluster of hand warmers cools near the wall after serving their purpose in the evening. Everything here feels used, lived in, familiar tools that help the castle endure another winter day. A quiet truth from the way people lived in these fortresses begins to settle in your thoughts. Warmth in a medieval castle was not a luxury, but a rhythm, a cycle. People gathered it, shared it, saved it, stretched it as far as it could go. And at the end of each day, they returned to places like this, where the final embers of comfort awaited them. You lean back slightly, letting the slow heat seep into your shoulders. The fire crackles softly. Sparks drift upward, disappearing before they reach the chimney mouth. You imagine how many nights unfolded like this winter after winter, year after year. Knights shedding armor, servants sighing into the quiet, children wrapped in cloaks, drifting off against the soothing rise and fall of emberlight. Even the castle walls seem to relax here, their harshness softened by the tender glow. Your eyes drift to the window slit. The world outside is a black canvas of cold. The wind hisses quietly against the stone. But inside, this small fire holds the darkness at bay, shaping a circle of peace around everyone gathered. You picture someone placing a fresh log on the fire, watching the flames rise gently, then settling in close as the room warms just a little more. You shift on the bench and rest your palm on the stone floor. It is cool, but not painfully so. The warmth from the hearth reaches it in faint ripples. This gentle heat, this slow comfort, would carry people into the night. Not enough to erase the cold entirely, nothing in a medieval castle ever did, but enough to let them sleep, breathe, and dream. Someone across the room adjusts their blanket and yawns. Another person murmurs a soft goodnight. A third stands slowly, stretching before heading to their chamber. The fire flickers behind them as they leave. You watch the door close quietly, leaving only the soft crackle of the embers. The night wraps around you, calm, patient, familiar, and for a moment, you feel the castle settling to easing its tension, letting the weight of winter rest lightly on its shoulders. You lean closer to the hearth and let your breath join the faint rise of heat. The embers glow like tiny suns in the darkness. And as the last flames settle into steady red, the castle prepares for sleep. You settle into the soft, dim quiet of the emberlit chamber, letting the warmth drift around you in gentle waves. The cold outside feels far away now, softened by distance and thick walls, its sharp edges dulled by flame and stillness. The room holds its breath with you, slow and steady, the air warming just enough to ease the tightness in your shoulders. Each passing second stretches a little longer than the last, as though time itself is growing sleepy. The fire has quieted to a soft glow, tiny pockets of orange breathing beneath the dark wood. The shadows on the walls lengthen and dissolve, their movements slow and comfortable. You take a deeper breath, warm in your chest, and let it slip out gently. The whole castle feels calmer now. The corridors outside no longer push with drafts or echo with footsteps. They simply rest. Your gaze drifts across the room, noticing how everything has taken on that soft, late-night haze. The blankets stacked neatly, the kettle steaming faintly, the stones warming the floor. Every detail settles into a peaceful hush. You feel yourself following the same rhythm, slower, steadier, quieter. The cold that clung to you earlier loosens its grip, replaced by a steady, soothing glow that seems to rise from the embers and settle into your bones. Another breath. Slower. The room dims just a little more. You let your eyes drift half closed, listening to the faint crackle of the coals. Even winter, with all its sharpness and bite, feels distant now. Outside, frost may cling to the ramparts, wind may curl along the towers, but here, in this small pool of warmth, everything is gentle. You lean back slightly. Let the stillness hold you. Let the warmth drift across your skin in long, quiet strokes. The castle sleeps. And so, soon, will you.